below me, is her hand of the queen. He will take your oaths in her name, after which you will travel together to Dragonstone to repeat it to her in person. He spoke up. And if we don't? Some Crownland knights spoke up. Well, he smiled, then the Night's Watch will happily thank me for the new recruits. This seemed to push many over the edge. Ancient Lord Eldon Estermont was the first to come forward. His surprise for having to kneel in front of his grandson was clear, but he did it all the same. After him, his son and other grandson bent the knee too, followed by all the Stormlanders and most of the Crownlanders. Of the 50 or so people, only 4 refused. He could respect their stubbornness. The Night's Watch had a very serious lack in members of nobility, so their lives would not be wasted. As those that had bent the knee joined the ones at the sides, only the Westerlanders and Reachmen remained in the middle. He called upon the latter first. Olenna and Margaery Tyrell had managed to flee the city towards Bitterbridge, but many of their nobles and companions had not. Most notable amongst them Lord Orton Merryweather, although it was being whispered that he was more Cersei's creature now. He had gotten a letter from Lord Willers Tyrell yesterday. The new Lord said he refuses to negotiate with the killers of his father and outright ignored his offer of a crown. He had been disappointed at the news, but not surprised. Ravens had already flown to the Florence and High Towers promising them the Reach in return for an alliance against the Ironborn and Tyrells. Other more troubling news from the region had also reached them. Willers Tyrell had announced his betrothal to Tala Tarly, the eldest daughter of Lord Randil Tarly. With this, and many other gifts and honors, he had seemingly brought the elder lord and his army into the fold, as it was finally reported that Tarly was marching. Apparently a few hundred men from the army had been executed for their loyalties towards the rebels, while some nobles were taken captive. After crushing any possible dissent, he was now marching on House Crane, one of the Florence major allies, with the remainder of his force. This swung the conflict greatly in the Tyrells' favor, although the Ironborn kept inflicting heavy damage on the Tyrell cause. He looked over all the people from the Reach. Many of those who had surrendered the castle to him hailed from there. He saw Sir Mark Mulador, the brothers Willem and Lord Varner, but also Fossoes and others. He got an idea there. I offered Willers Tyrell very generous peace terms a while back. Yesterday I finally got a reply. He refuses to negotiate with me after the death of his father and younger brother at the hands of my armies. As if it was my fault that they invaded our lands, burned our keeps and attacked our people. He said, frowning intentionally at the last sentence. This got him the support of many in the room. If he wants war, he will get it. The Reach needs a strong leader who can bring peace. If Willers Tyrell is not the one to do that, maybe the new Lord Florent will be. He has the better claim to the crown of the Reach after all. I'll make the choice pretty clear for you. Everyone that fought for Stannis against the Tyrells at the Blackwater and swears to do it again is free to leave. Every one of you will be escorted to a safe road at the border of the Reach. I advise you all to rally around Lord Alekhine Florent, together you may bring down the power of Highgarden. Any of the others who publicly denounce House Tyrell and swear on the Seven to go to war against them may leave too. Those who don't will be escorted towards the dungeons. He exclaimed. Many of the lords looked at each other, until the brothers Willem stepped forward. Our father was killed by Tyrell and Rowan troops while cowardly attacking us in the rear here at the city. I will not sit in jail for them. I will try my all to bring House Tyrell low once and for all, I swear it on the Seven. The eldest swore in front of the whole hall. Sir Mark Mulador was next. He had lost half his arm in the battle and it was clear he was keen on revenge. After him followed Lord Varner and a Fossoe. Their few remaining vassals and sworn swords were next. Some other landed knights and minor nobles denounced Lord Tyrell as well, but all the prominent nobles stayed loyal. They probably thought it safer to wait out the war than bet on the wrong horse. All it would bring them for now is a stay in the castle's dungeons. That didn't mean it hadn't paid off. If he could get 2 lords and a dozen of landed knights into the Reach to gather their resources against the Tyrells, he could easily give Lord Willers another headache. In truth, he couldn't care less if the Florents won or not. That's why he hadn't complained that the Baratheons would be sending Sir Axel Florent to the war. All he wanted was for the Tyrells to be too distracted to be able to attack him. His other objective was for the Reach to damage itself as thoroughly as possible, so the winner couldn't afford another war and would be forced to come to terms with him in time. Now, only the Westerlanders were left. He had contemplated addressing them like this too, but he had thought the better of it. He addressed one of the sergeants of his guard. "If you would be so kind as to escort Sir Crickehall and Sir Algood to my solar and have food and drinks served to them. I will be with them when they are finished. Bring the others to the dungeons, but make it comfortable enough for them and have food brought down to them as well." The sergeant simply bowed, followed by a series of short commands to the guardsmen around him. As the last prisoners left the room, "What of the gold cloaks that stayed loyal to the Lannisters, your grace?" Robin Flint asked him. "Are there many?" He responded with a question. "No, about 24 or so have been taken captive," the Flinter replied. "Prepare them for the voyage north towards the wall." Flint bowed and walked out with 2 of his guards. As they slipped out, a Riswell man-at-arms entered the room. He bowed very low before addressing him. "Your Grace, we have inspected the dungeons, as ordered. We found many a common criminal, but also others. Among the captives we found certain nobles that my liege thought would be sympathetic to our cause. All have been brought to see a maester and all will be offered a hot meal and a feather bed. However, one of them was quite adamant about speaking to you, your grace. His name is Lord Beric Donderion. What should I do with him?" He looked upon the guard in surprise. Beric Donderion had been with his father when he was captured. He looked towards John and he saw him make the same connection in his head. "Let him in, please," he told the guard, trying to hide his shock. The lord that hobbled through the door wasn't what he had been expecting. He had heard from Sansa how the young Stormlord had been a dashing young man upon which the ladies looked fondly. Not much could remind you now that he had been such a man. His once red gold hair was in disarray. It was too long, unkempt and extremely greasy. Patches of sweat and dried blood kept it sticking to his skull and neck. The Marcher Lord was leaning very heavily on a walking stick someone must have brought him. He could also see a horribly healed scar on his left shoulder where parts of his tunic were ripped off. It looked like a battle scar which had never been properly cared for. The tunic itself was in tatters and obviously hadn't been replaced in many months. On first notice, Lord Beric looked broken. However, when you looked closely in the man's face you could see a steely resolve. The man seemed to have half-handedly splashed his face with water, as less grease and blood could be found there. He probably looked more recognizable like that, or that's what he gathered from the shocked faces of recognition from the other Stormlords present. "King Rob," the Lord addressed him loudly, while respectfully bowing his head a little. "Lord Donderion," he responded while nodding his head back. "I am pleased to see you alive. We all feared the worst had happened, after so long a silence. I am still alive, yes. I am the last one I believe. Heard your father died and my squire, Lord Dane, got out at least. Don't know much since then. Your vassal Roose Riswell filled me in on some of the basics, yet I excuse myself if I'm not entirely caught up yet. That doesn't matter, Lord Beric. All will be explained in due time over a hot meal and a price from the Lannisters' wine cellar. I heard you wanted to speak to me immediately. Yes, I do. I am the last one alive from our side who saw what happened here the day your father and I were captured. The day Sir Roland Storm and Sir Robar Royce were unjustly murdered for defending King Robert's honor. You need to hear this, as do some of the others present in this room," the crippled lord said, although he could see the strain on his face from leaning on the cane. "You saw what happened to my brother?" Sir Andor Royce asked, as he stepped forward out of the crowd. Donderion looked at the Vale Knight and quickly recognized the Royce livery he was wearing. He nodded sadly. Him and many brave others that were ripped from this world too soon by nothing more than Cersei Lannister's greed and lies. He could see how the Stormlord was preparing himself to start the tale and decided to interrupt now instead of after he started. "Guards, bring some comfortable chairs with cushions over." He looked across the hall. "Bring at least 4 of them." He walked down from the Iron Throne slowly, as to not cut himself. By the time he reached the Lord Beric, 4 cushioned chairs were hastily being brought into the throne room. He had one placed next to the Stormlord and 3 in front of him, but with enough space so the rest of the hall would be able to hear their conversation in between. He took place in the center chair and urged Jon and Sir Andor to take one of the seats next to him. Those who lost kin in the fight should be on the front line to hear how it happened. His show of leaving the authoritative position of the Iron Throne to sit down with them was met with confusion and support. It also seemed like Sir Andor and the remaining Vale Lords were pleased with him being given a more central position, as were the Stormlanders with the respect showed to Lord Dondarrion. The tale told was one of fighting in this very throne room. It was followed by fighting across the yard and finally the Tower of the Hand. Sir Andor cursed when he heard the fate of his brother, vowing to find and end the Hound no matter the cost. He just numbly looked in front of him. His father had tried to do the right thing. He had even prepared himself and gone so far out of his way as to try and bribe the gold cloaks, a thing entirely out of character for him. Even he had been forced to play this vicious game the capital seemed to force out of all men. He had just been bested by more devious men, who were far more adept at those wicked games they played in the capital. Many a voice had also gone up cursing Littlefinger's involvement in the whole ordeal. Although at that, Sir Andor had simply smiled. I wasn't there, but I got word that my father personally took the schemer's head. That particular revenge has been acquired at least. This was news to Lord Beric it seemed, and he nodded gratefully for it. Lord Beric was quickly notified of the future situation of the Stormlands. He was all too quick to try and rise up from his seat to bow down to Shireen Baratheon. Seeing how difficult it was for him, Sir Andrew Estermont stepped forward and stopped him. Your loyalty is without question, my lord. I will simply take your vows, there is no need to kneel. After that was all done, Lord Beric spoke up. May I inquire about the remains of my companions and the fate of their families while I was locked up? He nodded. House Stark is still alive and strong. My brother and I marched south with the might of the north after news of your capture was made known to us. The remainder of our family is alive and well in Winterfell. I married my Queen Aelys, formerly of House Karstark. She has since given birth to my daughter Edara, although I am yet to see her for the first time. The Stormlord smiled at that. Your father would have liked that very much. The night before the slaughter, we shared some ale, your father and I. One of the last things he spoke about was you, both of you. He said, as he looked at him and then at his brother. He told me how he wanted you to be raised in a just world. How he would stand up against the Lannister crimes, not only because it was the right thing to do, but also to show you to remain true when times get hard. Lastly, he confided in me that whatever happened the following day, he knew his house and the North would be safe because he trusted the two of you to keep it so. Lord Beric's words did more to him than he could have ever imagined. He had great difficulty keeping it together, but it was his duty as a king to do so. After a few moments, he profusely thanked the man, as did his brother. After that, Sir Andor spoke up. My father and I swore vengeance after the death of my brother. We rallied together with the other lords of the Vale and rid it Littlefinger, his bastard son and his cronies. Our family is safe. While I lead parts of the army here, my father rules together with Lord Harold in the Eyrie. A memorial is to be built for Robar's bravery in one of our newly acquired villages. House Royce will never forget his sacrifice. From what I could tell, your brother spoke fondly of you and your father. He would appreciate it very much. Lord Beric smiled. Although he couldn't have known either his father or Sir Robar that well, it was clear that the short time together had forged a bond. If he thought about it, knowing your alleged king was a bastard of incest and knowing you are the only ones able to stop it would have that effect. Fighting side by side and seeing them die or be captured would only strengthen that resolve. Is Sir Roland's brother here, Lord Bryce? The whole throne room seemed to shift on their feet now, until old Lord Estermont spoke up. Lord Caron died at the Battle of the Blackwater. His killer, Sir Philip Foote, has since been dealt with. This shocked Dondarrion, who quickly asked. Then who rules the Caron lands now? No one, officially, as of yet. Although we have been looking at some very distant cousins of Lord Bryce to continue the Caron line. Sir Andrew Estermont spoke up. It seemed as if he wanted to speak up yet he remained silent on the matter. Their remains. The remains of the guards and servants were unceremoniously thrown in mass graves. Cersei Lannister adorned her gates with the heads of the nobles. He barely managed to spit out, thinking about the weathered skull he knew had been his father. Still. Dondarrion asked in shock. No, They have been sent to the Silent Sisters and afterwards will go to their homes. Jon answered, seeing full well how difficult he had it. He appreciated his brother's help as he had great difficulty checking his emotions for the moment. This seemed more than the weakened Stormlord could take, and he was quickly escorted towards a maester. He adjourned the court session and, as promised, allowed any who wanted to sit on the throne the possibility to do so. Only after Jon had done so, of course. He almost had to physically push him up there, but he knew deep down that his brother wanted a glimpse of the life he could have had. His brother was scared it would change him, he knew, but that was ludicrous. He would make sure he had that experience at least, even if it meant forcing him to so. Seeing his brother up there, Ghost silently vigil before the steps, did something to him. He could see the Targaryen Jon could have become for the first time. As they locked eyes, he swore they revealed some dark purple glint inside of them. It seemed he hadn't been the only to notice something was up, as many of the remaining nobles became silent. Jon noticed too and quickly walked down the steps. Luckily for them, the weird silence was soon broken by the great Jon, as he shouted that it was his turn next. His brother and he walked out of the courtroom together. Jon turned towards him to speak, but he stopped him. "We will talk about it tonight," he said encouragingly. 3 days later. The Red Keep had proven to even outdo its ominous reputation. After its capture, he had sent men into every room to look for secret passages. Some had been found and they had begun exploring and mapping Maegor's crazy tunnel system. What had shocked him the most was that they had found dozens of passages leading to previously checked rooms. Rooms his men had sworn to be clear of anything. No wonder some spy masters in the past had such a fearsome reputation. They could hear everything that went on in every room here. Anything that was said by anyone could be picked up. However, the secret tunnels had shown even more sinister things. Many closed-off passages led outside the keep or even outside the city, and the deeper and the further they went, the more of it they found. Wildfire, hundreds and hundreds of barrels of the explosive stuff. He had immediately called the last of the pyromancers to him. After they had gone to look at what they called the substance, they had sworn him that those stashes couldn't be from the Lannisters and were probably left there by Aes. After over 16 years, it was completely unstable. He had ordered all his men not to touch it and had evacuated everyone that didn't need to be there outside of the city. After 2 days and 2 nights, the remaining pyromancers, with their help, had managed to transport most of it to the dungeons and tunnels under the Red Keep. The keep itself had been emptied of everything valuable, from every book in the library to every piece of silverware or even the remaining dragon skulls Robert Baratheon had hidden away. Hundreds of thousands of valuables were transported to the camp to be divided there. He would be glad when that castle was finally gone. No healthy court could ever reside in a place built for secrecy and spying. To think some had proposed him to take the throne and rule from there. That was not the Stark way, and it shouldn't be anyone's way. He'd rather die fighting than rule a court in those circumstances, and for the first time he pitied Robert Baratheon. The man had never been cut out for ruling, but no one could be prepared to deal with the things they found beneath this godforsaken city. The good thing about the wildfire, as long as it didn't blow up prematurely, was the fact he now had a way to rid himself of all of it. The wildfire was buried deep below the castle and within Aegon's Hill. Still, the pyromancers ensured him that so many pots that old would leave a huge blast. The castle and most of the tunnels would cave in. The remainder would be forcibly collapsed or closed off. They had almost mapped out the entire system, and when that and the displacement of the wildfire were finished, Aegon's biggest legacy would be no more. It would blow up together with the hill that was named after him, a fitting end. He and his commanders had pondered about why these pots had been placed, to no avail. Answers had come from an unlikely source. Old Lord Rossby had told him in their meeting that, due to his keep's proximity to King's Landing, he had heard rumors that Aes was planning to track Robert's force and blow them all up together. Apparently, the Mad King was heard to have said that he would rise again as a dragon out of the fire. Another reminder why they could never let this Aegon or Daenerys anywhere near that throne. It even seemed to have done something to his brother, although he had quickly shaken it off. No, before the week's end all of this would be over. Even if the Targaryens tried to come back, he would make sure there was nothing for them to come back to. His father had been the third Stark in 2 generations to die here at this place. He would be the last. None of his kin would have walked those halls again. This would be his legacy. Chapter 51, Wildfire. 300 AC. John. It was a cold, but clear day. A breeze flew in his face, as seagulls could be heard overhead. He leaned forward on top of the battlements, as he looked upon the Red Keep. They were standing atop of the Gate of the Gods. It was the elevated point the furthest from the citadel. The pyromancers had ensured they would be safe here. The whole city had been evacuated for the spectacle, but the walls around them were lined full of people wanting to watch. Only in this corner though, as Rob had forbidden it everywhere else within the walls. They had triple searched the areas around here and below the gate to make sure everyone would be safe. Although they thought they had found all of the wildfire in the city, they couldn't be entirely sure. Better to be safe than sorry was his brother's philosophy, and most agreed. Most of the wildfire stashes they had found had been stacked deep inside the fortress or the hill below. They were put in the dungeons, the secret tunnels and cellars. Other smaller quantities were strategically placed by the pyromancers so as to make sure the fire would reach there. The pyromancers had drenched parts of the entryway to the castle in wildfire. These parts would be set alight by fire arrows from afar. Then the archers and pyromancers would have just enough time to get on their horses and speed away, before the wildfire reached the first of the barrels. When it did, all would go up in the air in seconds, the Alchemist Guild had told them. With them stood most of the high nobility, although a few had been left in command of the camp. In between their closest group of friends stood Cersei Lannister. She was both bound and gagged, a thing which made her presence a little more bearable. It had been Rob's decree that she would witness the end of her power base. She would be forced to watch it all go up in flames, before her head would be taken off. Tommen, as he was still a child, would be spared the visions of the burning keep. His sentence would also be postponed, as Rob was still unsure on what to do with him. He looked over his brother, as he frantically looked towards Aegon's Hill. He worried for him. The strain on him had been huge, with the addition of the Storm and Vale Lords. At 17 years old, he kept together a coalition that spanned half of Westeros. Grey Wind noticed it too, it seemed, as he saw how the direwolf was even more protective over Rob than normal. He wanted to walk over to him to subtly comfort him, but he was interrupted when the agreed signal was given. Everyone turned towards the hill. Moments later, they saw 3 fire arrows arc in the sky towards the stairs in front of the Red Keep. Immediately after they landed, green flames could be seen climbing up towards the Targaryen stronghold. As he looked at the pace it was going, he thanked his brother for the foresight he had shown in protecting the city. He had ordered everything around the Red Keep to be demolished, limiting the chances that fires would spread. The green fires licked at the castle until suddenly a small explosion could be heard and seen. Before anyone could say anything about it, it was followed up by a much bigger explosion. The whole hill roared as a blinding flash of green light erupted in front of them. He had to avert his eyes, due to the flash's intensity. When he looked, again he saw how parts of both the castle and the hill were up in the air. Debris fell all over a great area, even outside the hill, as both stone and dirt were thrown in the air. A few seconds later a thrust of wind hit them all square in the chest, knocking over one of the squires present. Smaller eruptions were heard and seen along the hill, and they were all in a trance, mesmerized by the beauty and destruction unfolding in front of them. That suddenly changed, when another explosion was heard much closer to them. He looked to the right and saw how the great September of Baelor was quickly going up in flames. Immediately all nobles started panicking. Not only was the greatest place of worship of the 7 rapidly catching fire, it was also a lot closer to them than they ever thought the fire would get. After a while, it became clear it had to be an isolated incident, but still the nobles were restless. The fires at the September, apart from their green color, just seemed to be spreading faster than usual. This was in big contrast against the great green fire in front of them on Aegon's Hill. It was something both majestic and horrible. He looked into the flames at the ruins of the Targaryen legacy, his father's legacy, and felt strangely drawn towards it. Of course, he knew that not everything was gone. No, almost everything that had been left in the Red Keep from the Targaryen era had been saved by Rob. Last night, his brother had ordered him to accompany him towards the docks. He had told him he had managed to salvage a lot of correspondence of his ancestors, together with heirlooms, prophecies, hundreds of personal books and much more. All of it was secretly transported to the north by a Mandaeli ship that had left on the morrow. All of it would be kept in Winterfell until his keep was built. His brother had promised him every last heirloom and correspondence. Some of its library would be incorporated in the Winterfell library because its knowledge was too valuable to isolate, but most of it would also accompany him to his new home. He had been completely shocked when he was told this, especially after seeing the hull of the large trade cod and how many items were actually in there. He had even taken a few of them out for him to enjoy on campaign. To read, he had taken a tome full of correspondence between Aegon the Unlikely and his siblings and children. Next he had taken out a set of armor. It had apparently belonged to his kinsman Baelor Breakspear. Although over a century old, it was seemingly repaired and restored. Some other letters made it clear that it had been repaired for Rhaegar, when was around his age. To his surprise, it was still in very good condition. Robb had let him take it but had ordered him to keep it all a secret. It was the first thing he ever owned of his father except for the folded flag and dragon ring that Lord Howland had brought him, back when he had told him of his parentage. When he had strapped it on, the armor fitted almost perfectly. He knew by now that his build resembled that of Rhaegar greatly, although noticing it in that manner had been something else. His thoughts went to the kin he had never known before. From Daenerys the Dreamer to himself. A whole lineage of people who had once controlled dragons to do their bidding. He had sworn himself he would find out as much as possible about them. He would keep his parentage secret, until one day his sons were old enough to know. He would raise them as Northmen, loyal to House Stark. He would make sure none of them had any weird notions of ever sitting a throne, but still he would tell them if only for the mother he had never known. The dragons were where he came from, if he wanted to or not. However, he would decide where the lineage went to next. It would go north and live a quiet and well of live. He would raise a family and build his own house on the fertile ashes that were House Targaryen. They would neither forget, nor honor them, but their wicked ways would end. What to do with his supposed brother though? He had thought about it for hours on end and had spoken casually about the identity of Aegon with many more people. People who had arrived with his uncle just after the sack and even some Westerlander prisoners that had been in the city with Tywin's army. They all told the same story. This pretender couldn't be his long-dead brother, but who was he really? He looked upon the green flames, towering high above Aegon's hill for who knows how long. He stayed up there long after most nobles had gone back to camp. At one point, only he and Ghost remained, as both sat silently on the walls looking how the red stone remnants slowly blackened or even melted. When he finally left, he felt as if a part of him had died. Would his ancestors curse him from the afterlife? He thought, as he made his way back to camp. The darkness gave him no answer, as the only sign of life was Ghost nudging him forward from time to time. You can be whoever you want to be. You can be a dragon or a wolf, a king or a noble. Whatever you decide, know that I will be proud of you. To me, you will always be special, my son. Had been the last words his mother had written to him. He had chosen. He would never be a dragon, nor a king. He knew that, somewhere, she at least would be proud of him. The thought strengthened his resolve, as he knew what he would do now with his future. The next day. The next morning, he stood in the square in the middle of his camp, together with everyone of importance in the armies and many more. Stands had hastily been built to give as many people as possible a chance to see what would unfold today. He stood next to a small wooden throne that had been brought out for his brother. In front of them sat Cersei Lannister. Her gag and bounds had been removed, but there was no way for her to go. She would not get away with the things she had done, not this time. Cersei Baratheon, formerly of House Lannister, you are brought here to be held accountable for your crimes. You are accused of plotting against your husband and king, committing adultery and incest against him with your brother the Kingslayer, scheming to illegally obtain the throne for your children, unjustly obtaining and exercising their regency, unlawfully murdering and executing many nobles, among them the Lord Paramount of the North Eddard of House Stark, inciting civil war in Westeros, crimes against the city of King's Landing and its people, and many more. How do you plead? The herald next to them demanded in a loud voice. The former queen just looked at him and spat at his direction. A lion doesn't concern itself with the opinions of sheep, she retorted. Although she still tried to play the strong ruler in command, everybody could see she was not. Her hair had darkened and had been tangled because of her stay in the black cells and the camp prison. Her face was gaunt, and she had clearly lost too much weight in too short a time. She may think of herself as a lioness, she didn't look like it any longer. Rob stood up. That may be so, but I am no sheep, he simply responded. His point was strengthened by both Grey Wind and Ghost, who stepped forward to stalk alongside him. We Starks are direwolves, and we have shown much and more on how no lion can withstand us. Your brother and lover couldn't do it at the Whispering Wood, your uncle and cousin couldn't do it at Oxcross, your father and other uncle could neither do it at Atlanta nor the God's Eye. Now your brothers and uncles are dead, as are many of your cousins. Your eldest bastard has died, your youngest is in my captivity, and the other is somewhere off in Dawn, for all we know she may be dead as well. His brother spoke, as he slowly walked over to her. He could see the anger and rage in her emerald green eyes, but it was soon replaced by fear as Grey Wind stalked over so closely that she could feel him breathing down her neck. The once mighty pride of lions is reduced to you, your father, who can't even control the Westerlands anymore, and some cousins stuck in Riverrun or Casterly Rock. Your reign is over, your seat is destroyed, he continued, as he and the direwolves walked around her sitting on her knees in the dirt. Your life story will be a lesson to all. Rob raised his voice as he looked over the crowd. A cautionary tale of what happens when you attack a member of our pack. Even if, like the woman in front of you, you manage to bring down the leader of the pack through lies, treachery and deceit, his pups will come to haunt you and bring you to justice. He stopped as he looked back down to her. We pulled down everything you loved and cherished. Your family, your castle, your wealth and your power, it's all gone. I promise you one more thing. Your line and that of your fathers will end. Neither your son nor your daughter will be able to ensure the survival of your dynasty. Your family line of incest and deceit will not be allowed to continue. The names of Cersei and Tywin Lannister will only be heard as whispers when people warn not to cross House Stark or the North. The names of Joffrey, Tommen and Myrcella Waters will never be heard at all. They will be forgotten to history, labeled as insignificant and inconsequential. The hate with which those words were said was frightening, and many around them started to shuffle on their feet. Still, nobody would ever blame Rob for it. She had murdered their father. Her actions had led to family members of almost everybody present dying in the last 20 months of fighting. All wanted revenge, all wanted to see her dead. When hearing of how her precious children would simply vanish from history, even Cersei Lannister seemed shocked and afraid. It seemed as if she trying not to start sobbing, a thing he could have never imagined. Rob circled around until he stood in front of her and took a step back. He regally rested his right hand on Grey Wind's neck and proclaimed, I, Robb Stark, King in the North and the Riverlands, Lord of Winterfell and Protector of Riverrun, name you guilty of all the before-mentioned crimes. As punishment, you will be sentenced to death. Rob nodded to him and he stepped forward. He went to his knee and ceremoniously offered ice to his brother and king. He took it out of the scabbard and walked over to the block that was placed by a few of the servants. Cersei was emotionlessly dragged towards it. They had all expected her to scream and shout, but she looked lifelessly in front of her. Any last words? She looked up towards Rob and her defiance came back. After staring with a look of utter hatred for a few seconds, she spat at him. May your family befall the same fate as mine. May your sons die in front of your eyes and your daughters be taken away never to return. May your castle be torn down and your home destroyed. May your people betray you and everyone you care for. I curse you and your family, Robb Stark. I curse you in the name of all the gods, be they old and new. His brother didn't even flinch. He simply nodded and signaled for a servant to press her down upon the block. He inhaled 2 times loudly, before ice was swung high into the air. It came down in a lethal arc, as the head of Father's killer was taken off with his own sword in one clean swoop. It rolled into the mud in front of it and came to halt with its green eyes piercing towards the sky. For a while, nobody said a word. Their king broke the silence. Justice has been served, he simply stated, before walking away closely followed by some of his honor guard. For a while, people stood there not knowing what to do. After some time, they started to trickle out as he looked upon the head responsible for his father's, or uncle's, murder. When almost all were gone, Sir Wendell Mondaly put his hand on his shoulder. "It's done, John. It's over. The Red Keep is no more, and the Lannisters' reign is forever broken. You have your revenge, now it's time to let go and rebuild." He looked over his shoulder to his former mentor and nodded. Together they walked towards the eating tent. A massive construction that served as a hall of some sort for the highest of the nobility. They went in and had some pints of ale brought over. They talked long about the future and what they would do if this war was over, although everyone knew more obstacles would have to be removed before they could ever accomplish any of that. 2 days later. Rob. They stood in the command tent around a large table with maps spread across it. More news had come in. The Dornish had taken Nightsong and were now besieging Harvest Hall. Blackhaven was on its last legs as well and was expected to fall in the next weeks, as well as some smaller keeps. When that happened, they would have to face the whole Dornish army at Storm's End. Not a thing anyone was looking forward to, but they were preparing for it. In a few days they would march south. Before the main army, a small vanguard of 2,000 men under the joint command of Lord Flint and Sir Eamon Estermont would leave to reinforce their position on the Wentwater and make sure no ambushes would await them in the Kingswood. Their entire army would take the King's Road south after that until they reached the seat of House Wentwater in 3 columns. There they would regroup their soldiers, mindful of any attacks south beyond that point. In the meantime, they would be reinforced by the houses of the southern Crown lands. They would try to rally the Stormlords as well but were realistic that it would have little effect for now. Most had fallen to or were besieged by the enemy. The others were mostly isolated and wouldn't be able to come to their aid. Besides, all those houses had lost the majority of their forces at the Blackwater anyway. No great forces would be able to be raised under the greatest of circumstances. Once regrouped they would march down to Bronze Egget. House Buckler hadn't answered the calls of Shireen Baratheon after Lord Ralph's cousin was killed on Dragonstone in an attempt to seize the regency. They didn't know how if they would be welcomed there, so they had to proceed with caution once they passed the Wentwater River. He would leave a small force to take control of the area around King's Landing and ensure the loyalty of the former Crownlanders. The main army would proceed south from the moment Lord Harold Arryn arrived with another 3,000 Vale soldiers. It seemed as if the young lord wanted to prove himself in battle now that his rule was safe. Interestingly, Lord Royce and his daughter, the new Lady Arryn, would be left as regents. The reinforcements would be welcomed either way, although he wasn't looking forward to dealing with Lord Harold. He had finally established good relations with Sir Andor and the other Vale commanders. When Lord Harold arrived, he would have to invest that energy all over again as command would shift towards him. Sadly, he didn't have enough time to ponder upon that now. He had ordered parts of his forces to help clear out the remnants of the city. All buildings on both Egon's and Visny's hills were gone. Egon's hill had imploded to the point where the once greatest elevation of the city was now smaller than the other two. They would just clear what they could there, as the complete work would take weeks. Visny's hill hadn't really exploded, but much was burned out. His men had managed to salvage some of the faith's heirlooms that had still been stored in the Great September, but the building itself was largely destroyed. He knew rumors were going around that it was no coincidence that only the September had also been blown up. A thing not helped by the attitude of some of his friends. Even though he had had nothing to do with it, he couldn't deny that it had solved a problem for him. He wanted to largely abandon the corrupt city and convert it into a well-functioning border town in the far future. Having the largest structure of the faith there didn't help his vision. He had also not been keen on having the influence of the most devout in his kingdom or so close at his borders. If he treaded lightly to not offend too many of his vassals, this could solve many a problem. It was almost too convenient, if he thought about it. Maybe some of his friends had had something to do with it in the end. He would never find out though, nor did he want to. Unity was what they needed now and there was much to be done. Thousands of houses needed to be cleared out, if they didn't want major diseases to start spreading. Some of his vassals had even turned to controlled fires in closed-off neighborhoods to quicken the clearing process. Many transports also had to be organized. First of all, there were the prisoners from the Westerlands and the Reach that had to be moved to secure keeps in the Riverlands. Secondly, there were the first shipments of loot going north to White Harbor. Sadly, he couldn't transfer even a third of what he wanted, as most of his ships were needed to fight against the Targaryen pretender. Lastly, there were the constant supplies for his army that had to go through here. He had already organized many supply convoys to many keeps between the Blackwater and the Wentwater so he would be less dependent on the situation here, but it remained a lot of work. Work he would have rather spent on the issues at hand, as the Dornish marches weren't the only region from where troubling messages were heard from. Apparently, parts of the Golden Company still remained on the Stepstones. They had taken up certain positions there and would be transported to reinforce the enemy army soon. A thing he didn't like one bit, and that they would have to try and stop with their own fleets. More surprising news from Essos had also come. It seemed Daenerys Targaryen had left Meereen with a big army of unsullied and freed slaves. On which fleet nobody knew. By now, she was somewhere close to Volantis, where a massive slave revolt had broken out support of her. It seemed that she didn't have anything directly to do with it, but there were also rumors of her defeating the Iron Fleet in the Gulf of Grief that had encouraged the uprising. Although it was a joy to hear of the defeat of the Ironborn after everything they had done to them, having to fight the one capable of doing that in the future didn't prove reassuring. They didn't know much, only rumors from traders docking in Dragonstone, Duskendale or Gulltown. Many among them dismissed the stories of her defeating the Ironborn, and especially those talking about Dragonfire. Still, one thing was clear: Aerys II's daughter was sailing west. This made his campaign against the Pretender in the Stormlands even more pressing. He would have to defeat him before they could unite, and he would have to do it fast. His plan was to force them to fight a decisive battle between Bronze Egget and Storm's End. His army should outnumber them, and most of his forces were much more experienced than anything the enemy could throw at him except for the Golden Company. When he had said that aloud, but a few minutes ago, his uncle Brynden had cautioned him for the likes of Oberyn Martell and Lord Euronwood. Both apparently knew how to fight. Many lords who had been present at the Trident also cautioned for the strength of a Dornish spear wall. The respect many of the older lords showed for the Dornish was remarkable, and he would ask them more about it on the march to make sure he didn't underestimate them. "Why don't we send ships to intercept her from coming to Westeros? It would either delay her arrival and give us more time to defeat this Aegon, or it could stop her altogether," Domeric proposed. "With what force? The Pretender's fleet at Tarth prohibits any action our fleet could undertake," Sir Andor Royce answered. "Why not hire a sellsword fleet in Lys or Teosh? She is known for trying to break up slavery. Those cities' whole existence and economy would collapse if she had her way. I don't think any of them wants her to rule in Westeros any more than we do. Let alone what damage she will do in passing their cities. She might just attack them outright, if not challenged properly," the young Lord Bolton explained. He looked to him, pondering the suggestion. It wasn't such a bad idea, if he was honest. The worst-case scenario would be that she would be delayed and lose parts of her army for some coin. Best-case scenario was that she would be dealt with without the loss of any of their own men. He looked around the tent. "What do you all think about this proposal?" he asked his lords. Most seemed to agree, and after working out the details, he decided to send Lord Melcombe as their envoy to Teosh. The man had experience dealing with the Free Cities and had served in a sellsword company in Essos for a few months back when he had only been a young second son. It was his job to have a Tyroshi fleet intercept her at the Stepstones and try to prevent her from reaching Westeros. Taking out some of the positions of the Golden Company on those islands would be a boon against both Targaryens, but that was only secondary. They would offer the Tyroshi coin, future trade agreements, and the ownership of all the territory on the Stepstones now in control of the Golden Company. After that, it was the North's turn. He had of course received multiple messages, one of them from his wife on the progress their daughter was making. However, he had also received letters from Alaric Karstark and the Great Yon's cousins. Apparently, the wildlings were still restless. Another one of their attacks had been pushed back at the wall, but many losses had been encountered on their side. Alaric also warned them about his grandfather. Old Arnulf was appointed Castellan of Carhold when Lord Rickard left with all his sons. It seemed that he was getting bolder by the day in that position. He had supposedly been heard openly criticizing Harry On's leadership and capability to rule. The latter was growing increasingly annoyed with the fact, although he could do little about it from here. He himself had made sure Harry was in complete control of the Karstark forces and had ordered Alis to throw her weight in the situation to balance things out in the north. The greatest relief in the situation was that Alaric seemed to distance himself from his grandfather more and more as time passed by. The Karstark cousin commanded an important part of the remaining garrison and was constantly dealing with other houses. It wouldn't do if he was to tarnish Harry's reputation with them. Still, the situation was to be monitored. There were also rumors about renewed activity around the Dread Fort, but nothing concrete could be heard. Most of the local nobles Domeric contacted didn't reply, which didn't help the situation at all. He knew that after they got home, those were the first things he would have to deal with. Lastly, news had also come from the Reach. It seemed the Ironborn were still making steady progress against Houses Redwyne and Hightower. All accounts told them they now controlled most of the Arbor proper, including House Redwyne's ancestral castle. To make matters worse, it seemed they had managed to sink the vast majority of the Hightower fleet in the bay outside of the city. The Reachmen seemingly fought hard and the victory wasn't without losses for the Ironborn, but it was still a big blow. Although he despised all of the slaughter the Ironborn inflicted, he couldn't fail to notice that this was good news for him in the long run. These losses seemed to weaken two of the strongest houses of the Reach and its damage would last for decades. Additionally, it would also damage Willa's image, as they were the two houses closest to him in his rule. His ideal scenario would be a Reachman victory, as he would still have to deal with the Ironborn in the future. Yet, the more damage the Reach took the better for him. Willers had already dismissed his peace offer, he didn't want him to be able to wage war on him anytime soon. There was also no benefit of him fighting with the Reach. All it would ever lead to was more death and destruction in return for nothing more than loot. No amount of coin was worth devastating another area like that, let alone losing more of his men. Not if he could help it anyway. Besides, the messages clearly mentioned Ironborn losses as well, so that was something to cheer for in the very least. Every raider sent back to his cursed drowned god was a boon to Westeros and one less rapist that could wash up on his shores in the following years. All that was left to discuss now was what to do with the citizens of the city. After some haggling and the arrival of big parts of the Vale trading fleet, the Vale Lords had accepted to transport some 20,000 civilians towards the Vale. They would be spread around Solpants, Wickenden, Gulltown and the lands and ports belonging to Houses Royce, Melcombe and Hunter. They would replace some of the losses the areas had taken during the Civil War, as well as stimulate replacing the ships they had lost due to the flight of the majority of the Grafton fleet. When he had walked through the encampment outside of the city, as well as the few neighborhoods that were still inhabitable, he had noticed thousands and thousands of orphaned children. Often, they were still very small and forced to starve or illegally obtain food. It broke his heart to see children the ages of Bran, Arya or even Rickon forced to fend for themselves. He had written additional letters to Lord Wyman Marndaley, Lord Andrew Locke, Lord Bim Woolfield and Lady Lysa Flint a few weeks ago to send over transport ships to start dealing with the issue, and they had finally arrived. He realized that the worst of it might be here, but many other orphans would exist in the Riverlands due to the mass destruction. Even in the north their numbers would grow when some of their fathers didn't return from the campaign. His father had told him he always needed to take care of his people, so he would try to stand by that here. Messages had flown to order the construction of orphanages in White Harbour, Winterfell, Barrowton, Riverrun, Seaguard, Fairmarket, Duskendale, Widow's Watch and Oldcastle. After successful reconstruction of the towns, 2 more would be built at Maidenpool and Stony September. He would not let a whole generation of his subjects go to waste or die of starvation. In these orphanages, the boys would be taught skills to aid in the local economies. Girls would be taught basic skills such as sewing and how to organize a family. He also made sure the orphanages in the north would partially focus on northern identity and belief in the old gods. The last thing he wanted was to alienate the local people by importing foreign acting small folk. The only exception would be White Harbour, where they would be allowed the freedom to organize it in either faith. Sir Wylis had been enthusiastic at the idea, as in the long term it would mean hundreds of additional, well-trained sailors for their trading fleets. All orphanages would be founded with money from the campaigns in the Westerlands. After establishment, they would have to be run by the local lords. The economic benefits they would bring on the long term would largely go to those same lords, so he didn't feel bad about burdening them with this. Some 8,000 orphans under the age of 10 would be moved throughout his realm. Of those, 5,000 would go to the north on the ships that had arrived. At least 1,000 of them would be going to Wintertown, where Alice had long been constructing 2 very large orphanages for them, one for males and one for females. The only rule in spreading out the children would be that no siblings of the same sex would ever be separated and that those of the other sex would be allowed to see each other regularly. Alice had been adamant on this in her letters and he had chosen to enforce it throughout his whole kingdom. He wanted to make it a tradition for Stark kings to take care of orphans after wars. It would not only help those kids, it would also be beneficial economically, as well as strengthen their hold over the small folk. The men might feel more inclined to fight for his family when they knew their offspring would be well cared for, if the worst should happen. Sadly, he only dared to take the younger orphans in as he wanted those people to assimilate into the local cultures as much as possible. He had thought about things he could do for the others as well, and some small measures had been implemented. Around 200 boys between the ages of 12 and 14 had been accepted in the army as stable boys, apprentice fletchers or blacksmiths and the like. Some 300 strong boys from the age of 15 and up had been recruited in the army. They were being trained under the stern command of Roderick Umber, the Great Jon's brother. Another 150 adolescent girls had been accepted as servants and washerwomen for the upcoming campaign. He did all he could to help as many as possible, but even after all of those measures 110,000 people remained in or outside the city. He once again urged the lords of the Crown lands to take in some more people. Most had already gotten large influxes of immigrants over the last year and had a hard time housing them and keeping the peace in their own lands because of it all. Still, some like old Lord Rossby promised to take in a few more, which he was very glad for. Sir Andrew Estermont mentioned that a few hundred would be transported to Dragonstone and Driftmark as well. Apparently, Queen Shireen wanted to do much more, but she wasn't able to at this time. However, they promised to take in thousands more when their lands were freed from the Targaryens. Sir Andrew had also promised to talk with his liege Lord Arryn about settling some of them in the personal lands of House Arryn, as they had suffered under the Civil War. Great strides were made because of all of this, but tens of thousands of people were still positioned outside the city with too little food and hygiene to keep them all alive, and it broke his heart. Killing your enemies was one thing, having tens of thousands of civilians pay the price for it was another entirely. The situation was so dire that a few hundred boys between the ages of 14 and 17 had even accepted to voluntarily go to the war, just so they would have something to eat this coming winter. He had wholeheartedly accepted this, yet it still saddened him to see that such measures would be necessary for them to survive. After no more lords spoke up, he finished the meeting and sighed. He had heard his uncle say that King Robert had noticed how conquering a kingdom was one thing, while ruling it was something completely different. Be that as it may, fixing a region that had been neglected and destroyed by Cersei Lannister was much more difficult than both of them combined. Now that most of his thirst for revenge was satiated, he just hoped this war would soon be over so he could start helping the people to survive the coming winter. He also wanted to start building out his kingdom, beginning with the plans his father never got around to. Before he could start any of that, he would first need to defeat the Targaryen pretender. A part of him couldn't wait to be on campaign again. He only felt truly in control of his fate when leading an army. It was then he felt he himself could make the difference. Only a few more days, then they would be off. Chapter 52, The Straits of Tarth. 300 AC. Lord Davos Seaworth. He stood behind the throne in Dragonstone. All lords present on the island had gathered to witness what would happen here today. There were many more now than a few weeks ago. All those that had been taken captive in the Battle of the Blackwater and had bent the knee to Tommen had been forced to bow to Queen Shireen by Robb Stark. Most notably among them was Shireen's own great-grandfather, Lord Eldon Estermont, but many other high-ranking lords were also present. All of them looked upon the young boy who kneeled in front of their queen. She stood up from her throne and walked over to her cousin. In her high childish voice, she called out the words they had taught her clearly the night before. I, Shireen Baratheon, the Queen of the Stormlands and the Narrow Sea, hereby name you a legitimate member of House Baratheon. Let the taint of bastardry forever fall off your shoulders as you raise again as Edric Baratheon." The young boy stood up with one of the biggest grins he had ever seen. In doing so, he looked very much like his father. A thing which no Stormlord seemed to have missed. A great applause was given, as many shouts of support were heard. It was a public secret that Edric would serve as their queen's prince consort when she came of age. Tonight, it would be publicly proclaimed at the feast. No noble had complained, although he knew some were disappointed that she wouldn't wed a member from one of their families. Edric was well liked and, except for his ears, the spitting image of his charismatic father or his youngest brother Renly. The only ones who had reacted very positively had been the Estermonts. Lord Eldon had already proposed that Edric would serve him or his son as a ward. He had said that the boy could learn a lot about the Stormland from them in the next 3 years. They had rejected the offer, although other options still lay open. Edric could temporarily serve as one of the Estermont's squires in the coming war, for example. Maybe an agreement could be made for him to continue it after the war, if it meant that he would get his knight's spurs. Their only condition would be that he had to remain in Storm's End for most of the time. It was clear the Estermont family had risen greatly under the new regime, although he detected no malevolence in any of them. Lord Eldon seemed a little opportunistic, but he meant well. He even offered to take Gendry under his wing. A thing he greatly appreciated. The elder boy would serve in the army in the coming war. If he proved himself true, he would be knighted and given lands. He could take on a noble name, but not that of House Baratheon. That would not be accepted by many, due to his rough upbringing and his low-born mother. Still, by making the boy a knight and giving him lands and titles, he could rise high in the peerage of the Stormlands. A better life than he could have ever hoped for only a few months ago. The gods knew the boy deserved it. He had sent letters to all houses in the new Storm Kingdom, great and small. He had told them of their queen and her claims to the land. Mixed reactions had been received. Some houses had immediately bent the knee, some promising to send men and provisions to the army. Others had reacted positively but couldn't do anything due to the presence of the Golden Company or the Dornish army. However, multiple houses had just ignored his letters. It was unclear why they did that. Some must have been unable to answer, while others would have joined the enemy. The fact that he didn't know who of those had betrayed them was a thing that infuriated him to no ends. There was also another group, he knew. Those that detested them because of religious reasons. The most devout Valhalla worshippers hated him for bringing back the Seven and ending Melisandre's life. The group was small, but very influential. They were led by houses Massey, Hope and Grandison. They also had significant influence with houses Follard and Faring, although both of those remained loyal due to captives they held at Dragonstone. House Buckler was a big question mark, but a very important one. The army would have to pass Bronze Edit and he would rather they found friends there than closed gates and religious fanatics. Most of those followers of the Red God, he could deal with after the Targaryen pretender was dealt with. They would either fall in line or be removed from power. He had hoped less of them would oppose him, but he wasn't surprised even if his religious laws had been quite lenient. The state religion would be the belief in the Seven, but Valhalla and Old Gods believers would be accepted without any discrimination. The sole condition was that they would not actively try to proselytize anyone. Both Red Priests and the Faith Militant were banned in the kingdom. The last one had been one of the conditions the Starks had demanded. Apparently, they had seen and heard horrible things about them in King's Landing. They wanted to abolish them in as many regions as possible, especially those bordering the Riverlands. He had discussed it with Sir Andrew and Lord Morrigan at the time. All had agreed that it could serve as a great boon in the long term against the Starks. However, they had also acknowledged that enabling them might throw them into wars with them before they were ready. They would also surely plunge them into civil war with those houses still adhering to the Red God. For those reasons, and their general dislike of militant religious zeal, they had agreed to outlaw their presence within their borders. There was also another problem. He looked over the great hall to the foreign dignitary that had been sent their way. Tichonestris was sent to Dragonstone by the Iron Bank after the announcement of their alliance with Robb Stark. He had been pestering him who would pay the debts of the Iron Throne. They had agreed that he would introduce the Bravo Sea to the other coalition leaders, the heads of houses Stark and Arryn. Together they would try to come to an agreement. Sir Willis Marndaly had told him that the Stark King planned to simply cancel most of the debts of the Iron Throne. He wasn't planning on paying a single copper of the money owed to the Lannisters, Tyrells and the Faith. Together that was the vast majority of the 6,200,000 golden dragons of debt Robert Baratheon had collected. Apparently, Cersei Lannister had increased that debt with another 800,000 during her short regency. All of it to either house Tyrell or the Faith, so again of no real consequence. What was important was the 1,200,000 golden dragons Westeros owed to the Iron Bank and another 700,000 to the Tiroshi trade cartels. There was no way Shireen could carry the cost of that. Neither the Stormlands nor the Narrow Sea Islands were incredibly rich, and the former mentioned lands would be in disarray and plundered by the enemy besides. He had to discuss it with the Starks and others. However, he would have to do so in person and so it had to wait. He had told the Bravo Sea as much and he had agreed on the condition he was ensured an audience with Robb Stark. He had tried to start talks about formal trade relations with the Free City, but Tycho Nestris had understandably demanded that the debt be settled first. The debt issue was becoming a real headache, especially as he had other things to do. He had to help organizing today's celebrations, but more so he had to prepare the fleet. They and their allies had agreed that the enemy needed to be pushed back on the seas. It wouldn't do for them to defeat the enemy in battle, just for them to flee back to Essos again. Even worse possibilities could become reality, even if they won. After the Pretenders' defeat, they could join up with Daenerys Targaryen's fleet to give them an incredible headache in the future. No, they needed to be dealt with now. To his great surprise, Robb Stark had given him the overall command of the operation. He had placed the whole Marndaly fleet under his command under the sole conditions that he would accept Sir Wylis as his second-in-command and offer Sir Marlon Marndaly, Sir Roderick Locke and a Flint cousin seats in his war council. The Vale had offered a similar thing not much later. 3 of their number were to have a guaranteed presence in his war council while one of them would be guaranteed the command of the Vale squadron and direct communication to him. The names were to be defined by Lord Harold who could arrive in King's Landing at any moment. All in all, it was a very surprising result. All those highborn nobles with naval experience and he was given command. When he had voiced this to Sir Marlon Marndaly, who had handed him the letter, the knight had just shrugged. You know these waters better than anyone and you basically lived on a ship half your life. You're just the best man for the job. He had been absolutely flabbergasted at the response. Most would see it as a slight, concerning my past. The Northman had once again shrugged. As you said, it's your past. King Robb wouldn't offer you the job if you were still a smuggler. You're a knight and a lord in your own right. Moreover, you're the Lord Regent of the Queen of the Waters we are going to traverse. Besides, your former past actually helps us now. Just make sure it helps us drown our enemies and no Northman will complain of your command. He had remained silent after that until he had just nodded and thanked the knight. No wonder Robb Stark was doing so well in this war. He chose his commanders on their merit, not just their status. Yes, they needed to be nobles, but if they weren't any good then they wouldn't lead. It seemed most of the Northmen agreed with this philosophy, at least to some degree. It felt freeing in a way. At the Blackwater, he had had to serve under Sir Imry Florent. The Reachman had barely seen a ship in his lifetime, but he had been King Stannis' brother-in-law, so it had made sense. The result had been the loss of almost the entire fleet and thousands of men on it, not to mention 4 of his own sons. Somehow, he didn't think Sir Imry would have gotten the command if he had been Robb Stark's brother-in-law. He heard that the Stark King openly preferred his bastard brother and great-uncle to his uncle, the Lord of Riverrun and second most powerful man in his realm, when giving out command. Even when he did give him control over a portion of the army, he put a more than capable Riverlord as his second-in-command to watch him. It was a philosophy he would try to follow himself. Sir Eamon Estermont, the heir to Greenstone, had been sent forward to pave the way for the army in the Kingswood. He would send Lord Morrigan after him to take command of the main force from their realm once the main army arrived. Sir Eamon was a good, loyal man, and kin to the Queen besides, but Lord Leicester had a lot more experience and skill when it came to warfare. He himself would lead the fleet and Sir Andrew would rule from Dragonstone. This way, he knew all fronts would be covered by capable men. As the court had received a lot of new nobles, many could be considered more capable for the job than young Sir Andrew. However, the young knight had learned a lot over the last year, and much more importantly he was loyal and Shireen liked him. He would do well enough alone. If he had any problems, he could still ask the guidance of his grandfather, as the man was too old and weak to march again with the army. With all domestic and logistical issues sorted, he had to concentrate on organizing the ships. As the Great Hall cleared out, he walked over to Sir Marlon to discuss their departure. 6 days later, he stood on the prow of his flagship and looked on the deep blue waters that made up the Straits of Tarth. The enemy wasn't far, and hell could break loose soon. Still, the rhythmic sound of the water clashing against the ship made him calm. This was what he was born to do. This was where he belonged. He looked around him at the colorful array of banners coming from the dozens of ships under his command. He led a fleet consisting of Crownlander, Stormlander, Vale and Northern ships, a sight rarely seen. Especially, those from the north. That region hadn't had a significant fleet in over 1,000 years. Not anymore though, and he had to admit that the Mandaelis knew how to construct war galleys. All of them were well built and in pristine condition. It was a pleasure commanding a squadron like that. The Stormland and Crownland fleets he knew better than anyone else. The only difference had been the ships coming from Duskendale, but they had been joined under Northern Command and he had merged them into Sir Willie's squadron. The Vale fleet was the least impressive. Most of the Grafton fleet had deserted the Arins and had joined the enemy. Only a third of the original ships remained, but many of their crew and all of their captains had had to be replaced. This made them a lot less experienced than he would have liked. The Grafton remnants had been joined by a few ships from Houses Royce, Melcombe and Hunter, which only served to weaken their command structure. Overall command had gone to Sir Jasper Melcombe, the younger brother of Lord Cole. His strategy was simple. Once the enemy arrived, they would attack and use the narrowness of the strait to push them towards the mainland. He knew this area as the back of his hand and knew that the strongest current in the strait came from behind them. This would allow his ships to get more speed on the enemy and make it easier for them to do small maneuvers. Closer towards the mainland there were many rocks and treacherous sandbanks. The opponents probably didn't know the waters as well as he did and he planned to exploit that. He had positioned his squadron from the Stormlands on the right, as many captains had experience in these waters. Additionally, he had briefed all his captains in person. They would attack by using their superior speed to ram the enemy ships. Then they would turn and drive as many to the rocks as possible, hoping many got stuck or outright sunk when they came in contact. He looked again over the ships around him. When he had sailed into Blackwater Bay for King Stannis, he had known many by heart. He had known the names of the ships, of their captains, often even of many of its crew. Now most were strangers from distant regions of West Eos. He closed his eyes for a while and said 2 silent prayers. One for those who had been lost on that dreadful day, especially his sons. The second was for all the men under his command now. Please save as many of them as you can. Too many have been lost already. The more he thought about that day, the more his mind went back to the culprits. Yes, Tyrion Lannister had put chains on the harbour and had sent the wildfire out, but it was the Florents who had ignorantly led them into the trap. Luckily, they were all gone now. The last of them and their supporters had left Dragonstone on a Vale ship to Gulltown a few days ago. Sir Axel Florent and the most ardent Arholla followers had started their journey towards the wall. This would finally end the threat the Florent faction posed to the security of Shireen's throne. In return, the Queen Mother was freed from her comfortable confinement. She would be free to roam Dragonstone, albeit under guard. Her access to her daughter was to be heavily restricted. Never again would she influence the course of the kingdom. On their journey, her supporters would be joined by members of houses Corbray, Grafton, Sunderland, Upcliffe and many more houses that had opposed the new Lord Harold in the Vale. Chief among them would be Nesta Royce, Lady Lysa's main advisor at the end. The Night's Watch would receive a big influx of nobles, a thing they severely lacked. He alone had sent 19 nobles on the ship, accompanied by a few dozen men-at-arms and servants that had been too zealous in their adherence to the Red God. Robb Stark had sent over 200, many of them knights and men-at-arms of the Lannisters' personal household. All Crownland nobles, big and small, that had refused to bow to either King Rob himself or Queen Shireen had been put on the ships as well. Even Circe's most trusted male servants had been sent north. The Night's Watch had used 4 more stewards as well, it seemed. The convoy would make for a freak arrival. In total they would probably number around 400 when they reached Eastwatch by the sea. Considering the fact that the once ancient order now only counted some 600 to 700 members, it would be an incredible influx. Even so, they wouldn't be the last, Sir Marlon had told him. Robb Stark intended to force every West AOC, who had bowed down for the Targaryens, to join the Black Brothers. Dozens or hundreds more Westerlanders, Reachman and Ironborn would be eligible for a one-way trip to Eastwatch as well, he reckoned. You could say a lot about the Starks, but they didn't take half measures when you pissed them off. A thing he would always keep in mind and be sure to instill in the heads of both Shireen and Edric as well. The future safety of their people depended on it. He thought further on the future of the peoples he was responsible for as regent, as well as on his wife and 2 remaining sons in the Rainwood until the trumpets sounded. The enemy had been spotted in the distance. It would soon begin. He steeled himself for the cruelty that was to come and ordered their fleet onwards. In the distance Targaryen, Grafton, Valerian and Volan 10 sails were clearly visible. Their flags waving in the wind, vying for dominance with their own across the waves. He steeled himself and battle commenced not much later. Their heavy warships clashed together. The sound of wood splintering and sailors screaming filled the air. Parts of the sea were quickly coloring red with blood. He steered his flagship alongside a Volan 10 ship. His men were ready for it and his first mate shouted for the archers to knock and let loose of their arrows. 24 fire arrows and the missile from a Scorpion flew towards the smaller Isozi ship. Their sails quickly caught fire, as did some of the bodies of the men that had been directly hit. He quickly assessed that the ship would be out of the battle. He steered away and saw a Grafton ship ahead. Rowers, pull. Pull as you have never pulled before. We're going in for the kill. He shouted at the top of his lungs. All men on board understood what he was going to do. They grabbed a hold of the railing and the masts and steadied themselves for the incoming clash. The Grafton ship saw them too late and they punched right in their ship's starboard side. Their ram splintered parts of their hull. Rowers, pull back. He screamed and the cry was taken over by many. Their ship started to pull back and he saw how the enemy ship was quickly taking on water. They are done. As they pulled back, he tried to look how the naval battle was faring. However, they were too much in the thick of it to actually see what was going on. Before he could find another easy target, an enemy Vale ship rode next to them. They were planning to board them. It was far too late to turn away from it now. No matter, he knew what to do. Men prepare to board. Archers at the ready. The sailors prepared the grappling hooks, as the soldiers that had joined his crew stepped forward. When only a few feet separated both ships, grappling hooks were thrown on both sides. His archers did as they had been instructed before they departed. They only let loose when the grappling hooks were being thrown, greatly exposing the enemy sailors. After that, they fired at will. As many of the opposing soldiers that had prepared to swing the ropes were shot down, it were mostly his troops that got on the opposing ship. Fighting quickly broke out and his sailors pulled the ships closer together. Soon both decks were a war zone. He kept himself back. He wouldn't be of much use with one hand, but still held an axe in the other just in case. As luck had it, he didn't need to use it. After harsh fighting, the enemy crew was taken care of and the Grafton ship fell into their hands. The war galley seemed to be in good enough condition, so he ordered half his crew to take care of it and sail it back to safety. His Vale allies would probably appreciate the gesture when he gave them some of their ships back. He looked the ocean and saw how it was littered with wrecks, bodies and the red color of blood everywhere. He also noticed how most of the fighting was further away now. With glee, he realized his plan had been successful. They had managed to defeat parts of their fleet and were now driving the others upon the treacherous rocks on their starboard side. He ordered his flagship forward, as they had gotten behind their main force now. Although annoying for him, it was a good sign. With groups of his sailors and rowers now on the other ship, their speed was limited and it took way too long to catch up to the main army group. The scene he saw before him was something he couldn't have even dreamed of. The rocks in the distance looked like a ship graveyard. He counted at least 30 ships either sunk, sinking or stuck in the distance. In between them, only a few enemy ships remained and most seemed to be in the middle of surrendering. He and his second mate looked upon each other in wonder, before laughing loudly. The battle is one, you bunch of pricks. We have destroyed the entire enemy fleet. Everyone cheered and many of the other ships nearby started cheering too. Not completely destroyed, Lord. One of the sailors close to him responded, as he pointed at a dozen or so ships disappearing in the distance. Of no consequence, he waved him off. The enemy's might is broken. They'll most likely flee to Essos. 2 days later, he walked in the great hall of Evenfall Hall, the seat of House Tarth. It wasn't that big, but the native marble gave it a sense of splendor many other keeps didn't possess. Splendorous as it may be, it was strategically placed on a cliff on the west side of the island. Taking it by force would have never been easy. Luckily, the castle had opened the gates to them when they had arrived with most of their fleet. The pretender had only left a few dozen men as garrison, the others probably fighting on the sunken ships. None of those had been willing to give their life to protect the island. In the dungeons, they had found Lord Selwyn Tarth. Lord Selwyn, formerly a gallant and strong leader, seemed nothing more than a broken man. All his children had died and none remained to continue on his legacy. He had told them the story of how Loras Tyrell and his companions had killed his daughter Brian. Apparently, they had accused her of killing Lord Renly. After hearing that Sir Wylis Mandaily had been present at Atlanta, the Storm Lord hadn't stopped pestering him for details of the Flower's death. He had already announced that he would award his killer, Small Janumber the heir to Last Hearth, for this feat. Although endearing him to some of the Northmen, it was a thing that served to nothing. Seeing the state the Lord of Evenfall Hall was in, he had immediately started worrying about the succession of his lordship. The last thing they wanted was another succession crisis on their hands, especially with Daenerys Targaryen sailing towards these waters. Besides, more than enough houses were in disarray already. For the lands to be stable under Shireen, they would have to continue the well-established noble houses as much as possible. He had asked the local maester for a family tree of House Tarth and had been relieved when he had gotten it after a long search. Although Lord Selwyn had no children, siblings or other close kin alive, he had had a couple of cousins. All of them had died, some during the rebellion, others due to sickness and even one at the wall. Luckily, one not so distant cousin seemed to have fathered 2 sons before leaving this world for good. When asked about the 2 boys, Edwin and Quentin Tarth, the maester hadn't known much. After some research, he had responded that they resided in a small holdfast along the north side of the island. One was 11 years old, the other 9. He was on his way to Lord Tarth now with this new information. It would continue the family line and hopefully give the older man something to live for. He arrived at his solar and the Lord arrived not much later. Lord Regent, what can I do for you? I thought bending the knee to Queen Shireen and allowing you full control of my keep for the time being would have been enough. Lord Selwyn asked bitterly. He simply ignored this slight. I wanted to ask you about the future of House Tarth, my lord. This got him a death stare from the Storm Lord. What of it? My children are all dead, so are my brothers. I have nothing to live for. I suppose you want to know who of your supporters you can give my island to when I'm gone. The man all but spat at him. On the contrary, Lord Tarth. I want our Queen's rule to be as secure as can be. That includes having strong and well-respected houses serving her in their ancestral lands. For this island that means yours. I would not see House Tarth's succession create conflict and uncertainty in these lands. He replied simply. This seemed to surprise the Storm Lord, as his right eyebrow peaked up and he bent forward. How would you wish to accomplish that? I have no one alive in my family to carry on the name. You could of course find some distant cousin 9 times removed, but he would be less of a member of House Tarth than any of the serving maids here at the castle. I spoke to your maester, my lord. There seem to be other candidates still. One of your cousins fathered 2 sons before dying of syphilis when they were still babes. The knight had been married to a local noblewoman and the boys, Edwin and Quentin Tarth, have been raised by their mother's family on the north side of the island ever since. I would find it prudent if you took them in and prepared one of them to succeed you when the time comes. This would ensure the continuation of your house and the stability of the realm. A cousin that died from syphilis. The man whispered to himself. Yes, I know the one. It was a great scandal that many tried to hide. His widow fled from my court. If I remember correctly, his older brother died fighting valiantly for me during the Greyjoy Rebellion. Haven't thought about them for years. He fathered 2 sons, you said. He nodded in affirmation. They have lived on this island their entire lives and are direct male line descendants from your great-grandfather Lord Cameron Tarth. They lack a father figure and a mentor, roles you could both fulfill to enhance their lives and the future of your house. That's all you want from me. For me to take in the boys and mold one of them into an acceptable lord to succeed me after I pass. Yes, that's all. Queen Shireen needs peace and strong vassals. House Tarth is one of those. I would not see them fall unnecessarily. It's the duty of House Baratheon to protect its vassals. For me, that includes protecting them from internal ruin. He saw something in the eyes of the older lord. It seemed to be a newfound respect for him. The man stood up from his chair and clasped his arm. I thank you, Lord Davos. I look forward to working with you in the future. If there is anything you need, let me know. My house has always served House Baratheon loyally. Before that, we served their ancestors of House Durrandon for many a century as well. We will continue to do so under Queen Shireen. I will make sure to instill this in my 2 young cousins, even if it's the last thing I'll ever do. Chapter 53, The Iron Bank. 300 AC. Robb. He looked upon the last great remnant of the Targaryen legacy in the city, the Dragon Pit. The building was in ruin. The dome had collapsed, its walls were blackened and small pieces of the walls had been crumbling off. Even so, it now stood as the largest building in what remained of the city. His men had entered and searched parts of the ruin, but much of it was still buried under all the rubble. Some of his lords had suggested blowing it up with wildfire, the same way they had done with the Red Keep. However, he had rejected that option. Instead, the building would be torn down stone by stone. Its materials would be used to rebuild parts of the city, construct bridges across the Blackwater and fortifications to go alongside them. In his mind, he was already seeing a riverlands with a strong southern border. He would erect border castles and towns alongside the Blackwater River. They would control the bigger crossings and deny enemy armies the ability to easily march into the fertile lands behind. He planned on doing so for the entire length of the river, as to deter both the Reach and Storm Kingdom from ever moving on them in the future. He knew these plans would cost fortunes and take decades. Realistically, only his grandsons would be able to finish them, but that didn't mean he couldn't do a whole lot in his lifetime already. Having the materials of buildings such as this close at hand could easily reduce the time and costs for his plans to be executed. A few hundred laborers had been raised from the remaining populace and they would work on the project as he marched south. He had ordered one of his lords with experience in construction works to assign overseers and expected 2 weekly reports on the progress when he was in the Stormlands. The city was becoming less populated, now that 20,000 civilians had left for the Vale. All the selected orphans and prisoners had also been sent north. This had somewhat loosened the strain on supplies for these people, although the situation was still dire. However, the war took preference as of now. The United Army now counted 36,000 soldiers. 24,000 of those were sworn to him directly. 12,000 came from the north, 8,000 from the original Riverlands, 2,000 from the northern Crown Lands and another 2,000 from Cracklaw Point. With the new additions Lord Harold had brought, the Vale had 11,000 men. The Storm Lords and Southern Crown Lords had another 1,000 men at the capital. Yet, that last number was misleading as the Baratheons would supply more than that. Hundreds more would join them on their march and Lord Davos had also taken part of their forces to be able to retake Tarth and Greenstone after their recent naval victory. These troops would rejoin them in the future. He had been informed Lord Morrigan would take over control of the troops of the Storm Kingdom once they reached Bronze Egget when he arrived there with additional reinforcements. He had heard good things about the man, so he looked forward to his arrival. He wouldn't leave with the whole army. He needed a force to keep control of the former Crown Lands. He didn't trust most of them enough to stay loyal to him against a Targaryen enemy. Everybody knew where their loyalties had lain over the past 3 centuries. Letting them rebel in their rear could jeopardize his supply line and end his whole campaign. Because of that, he had chosen to leave Lord Deddings with 3,000 Riverlanders in control of King's Landing and the Northern Crown lands. The Riverlands had lost too many troops already and would take decades to fully recover from their losses. Making sure these troops survived would be a good thing in the long run. In addition, another 1,000 Valiman would position themselves just south of the Blackwater to keep those parts under control and make sure the Ahala zealots like House Massey didn't try anything foolish. He had other troops spread all over the Riverlands as well. There were big northern garrisons at the Twins under Lord Cleesewin and the Golden Tooth under Osric Carstark. Other smaller ones were dotted around too, and thousands of Riverlanders were spread across the area. They had by now recaptured all previously lost keeps and driven out the bandit and deserter groups who had taken refuge in them. Still, many bandits remained in woodlands and remote areas, and these soldiers were needed to keep the peace. Especially with all the refugees from the Crown lands that had flooded into the region. On top of that, the Mandaeali fleet fielded some 800 foot soldiers as well. These would be needed to recapture the islands of the Stormlands and could help with establishing supply lines by ship in the future. All of that left them with 32,000 able-bodied men to march towards Bronze Agate and confront the Targaryen pretender. All preparations had been made and they would leave on the morrow. Before that, he needed to have a talk with Lord Harold Arryn in private. He got back on his horse and the White Destrier reacted to his movements immediately. The horse was as majestic as he had ever been. He reminded himself to thank his brother once more for the gift. He had long struggled with naming him but had finally settled upon Snow. Both as a play of words upon his white coat and the brother who was responsible for him having the Destrier. For now, it would be a little confusing, but his brother would soon have his own name and house, so that should solve a lot of things. He rode back to their camp and talked with Robin Flint, Daisy Mormont and Patrick Mallister on the way there. After arriving at his command tent, he rinsed of the sweat from his body and put on a white tunic, lined with black furs. In the center was a majestically stitched grey running direwolf. The tailor had very clearly drawn its inspiration from Grey Wind, a thing which he deserved praise for. To go along with it he wore an elegant pair of grey trousers. Daisy had told him the clothes made him look regal and he trusted on her judgment. To top it off, he wore his bronze and iron crown. He positioned himself on the wooden chair that had been serving him as a throne these past few weeks. It served nicely, although he longed for his actual throne in Winterfell. Oh, how he wanted to be back home. Sit there and act out justice, maybe with his daughter on his lap. He became sad when his thoughts turned to his daughter. It would soon be her first name-a-day. She was already starting to walk and Alis wrote she had started saying her first words. All of that, without a father. She didn't even know him. Alis had ensured him she and his family often spoke of him to her, but he knew it was not the same. He steeled himself and shook those feelings off. If he wanted to see Edara again, he had to win this war. To do that, he needed this meeting with Lord Harold to go well. Before he could do that, however, a messenger arrived with news from the north. The Raven had been sent towards Riverrun and from there to Rosby. The rider had clearly ridden at great speed and he immediately ordered his servants to bring the man food and drinks. As he took the letter in his hands, he realized it hadn't come from Winterfell. No, this message came from Castle Black. Intrigued, he opened the scrolls and started reading. To His Grace, King Robb Stark. I write to you to inform you of a battle fought here at Castle Black. Last night, we were attacked in the rear by a force coming from south of the wall. Luckily for us, 1,000 Skagasi reinforcements had arrived in the area a few days earlier. The enemy force consisted of a large group of Bolton men, augmented by mercenaries, bandits and adventurers from all over the northeastern part of the north. They were led by the infamous Ramsay Snow. An hour before the attack, I was contacted by my cousin Hodder Lightfoot, who had joined up with the bastard of the Dread Fort. Due to our familial relations, he believed he could have me and mine turn our cloaks and attack our allies in the back. I declined and alerted the Umber, Clan and Skagasi commanders. Together we repelled the enemy attack and decimated the opposing force. Ramsay Bolton managed to flee with a few dozen retainers, but his army is no more. Hodder died fighting some Skagasi warriors. Although no Karstark men were officially present, I suspect my grandfather's hand in this. Alas, I have no proof for this, nor will any of the prisoners give it to us. Your loyal subject, Alaric Karstark. He looked upon the letter in wonder. Ramsay had ultimately made his move, it seemed. It seemed the Skagasi had won them the day, as he knew the other remaining men were exhausted and spread out. An attack on them might have completely destroyed them. What had Ramsay wanted to achieve? The only possible explanation could be that he wanted to ally with the wildlings and recruit them to his forces to attack the north. If so, that made the man even madder than they had already thought before. Those raiders would never listen to anyone, let alone some bastard boy with dreams he couldn't possibly attain. In any case, it seemed the disaster was averted. He would personally send his thanks to the Skagasi leaders and think of a way to reward them for this after the war. The island had long been too disconnected from the rest of the north. They had never been reincorporated into the fold after their rebellion had been crushed a century earlier. He would have to think on ways to undo that. In any case, he had to ensure that they stayed at the wall and held the line. The last thing he wanted was for the wildlings to break through and ravage his northernmost vassals. He pondered upon that for a while, before turning his mind upon House Karstark. His wife's family was quickly becoming a problem. Lord Ricard had been loyal to the bone, serving as a second father to him. Harry would serve him in much the same way. Yet, with the loss of his father and Ed, only he and To remained. This war was far from over and, although he dreaded even thinking about it, it wasn't impossible for something to happen to either of them. If that were to happen, a succession crisis would occur. The two most obvious claimants would be old Arnulf or his wife. The fact Alis was a woman would be a problem. It would be made even greater by the fact she would reside in Winterfell and not Carhold. In time it could be given to a second son, who could take the name Karstark. Yet, that would be 20 years away at least. The local people would never accept a 20-year-long power vacuum. In contrast, you had Arnulf Karstark, Castellan of Carhold for over 40 years to both Lord Ricard and his father Lord Beric. Although ancient, the man had two healthy sons with experience in running the keep. A strong case could be made for their claim. A claim he would never support. No, after all Arnulf had done to go against Harry, neither he nor his sons would ever get Carhold. He would make sure of that. Even Alaric or Osric would be better choices than their brothers, fathers or grandfather. He would have to discuss this with Harry and To, he realized. He would also need to agree with them that Arnulf would need to be replaced once the war was ended. The man could not be allowed to retain his powerful position. It was a threat to both his in-laws and the stability of the north. The power of his descendants would also need to be curbed. Of his 2 sons and 6, now 5, grandsons he had only ever truly trusted Os. Now, it seemed Alaric had proven himself to be trustworthy too. Both of them had gone against their grandfather to prove their loyalty to them in their own ways. He would reward them both in time. Loyalty such as that must never go unrecognized. He picked up a paper to scribble down his thought in preparation for his future talks with the Karstarks. He also added that he would write about it to Alis. It was only logical that he asked her for guidance about her own family. He put the paper away in the desk and thought back on the coming talks. He calmed himself and tried to mentally prepare for the coming discussions with Lord Harold. The North would not be better off with him mulling over things he couldn't yet change. Not much later, the Vale Lord arrived. He pointed him to a seat in front of him and offered him bread, salt and wine, which the man accepted heartily. He looked upon the heir of Jon Arryn. His sandy hair, aquiline nose and deep blue eyes unmistakably marked him as an Arryn. The dimples in his cheeks made him handsome and had certainly made many maidens blush. A thing strengthened by the news that he had already fathered 2 bastards by 2 different women in the Vale. For a moment, both men seemed to be sizing each other up. They had of course seen each other already over the past few days, but never talked privately before. Both had had too much work in preparing their armies for the coming march, while Lord Harold had to re-establish his control over the thousands of men already present here. He started the conversation and deemed it smart to start with the coming campaign. They talked for half an hour about the plans for their supply lines, the orders for the 1,000 Vale men, who would remain behind, and many other things. Lord Harold informed him the force of Valimon that would be left behind would be under the command of Lord Ruthermont. He didn't know much about the man and he told himself to gather information quickly after this meeting. After this, he finally opened the conversation about the future of the Vale. "What are your plans, now that you are Lord of the Vale, Lord Harold?" Those deep blue eyes looked back at him for a moment, before he answered. "First of all, I want to rebuild. Our kingdom has lost much in the recent civil war. Many of our nobles have died or been sent to the wall. Some regions are heavily damaged and have been depopulated. Our naval power, in both trade and military capacity, has taken a hit too. Some of this has even been in part due to the actions of your bannermen, although I thank you for the aid you sent our cause." He nodded simply in gratitude for the acknowledgement. He would not deign the small remark an answer. His men had done what they had to do and punished the traitors. He would not lower himself by giving excuses, let alone pay recompenses, for it. "To do so, I agree we must first get rid of the Targaryen threat. After that, it is my intention to cherish good relations with both your kingdom and some of the free cities to help rebuild our prosperity. I also thank you for allowing us to resettle some of the refugees from King's Landing in our lands, as it will help our recovery in the future." The Arryn Lord continued. He nodded, signaling he agreed with this plan. Cherishing good relations, in what capacity? Both knew what he asked: would they join his kingdom or proclaim their independence? "That is a thing we are still discussing, but rest assured that whatever we decide, a long-standing peace and alliance will be signed between the Vale, the North and the Riverlands," Lord Harold answered diplomatically. Internally, he groaned at this answer. Yet again, he received no clear answer. From the outside he kept his cool and simply accepted the answer. "If you would accept, we wish to wait to sign any form of official alliance until the Targaryen threat is fully dealt with. By that point, everything should be decided." Harold finished. He looked hard into those eyes and responded. I can agree on that, on a few conditions." Harold Arryn raised his left eyebrow at that. "What may those be?" "First of all, you confirm my overall command during the campaigns in the Stormlands. You will, of course, be part of every discussion and your voice will carry a long way, but if decisions need to be made in the moment, that prerogative will belong to me. I think I have proven my intuition on the battlefield to be sound enough to warrant this," he stoically replied. He knew how big his reputation had become and would leverage it as much as possible. Lord Harold didn't agree to it immediately. "I expect you will always hear my counsel, even when making those decisions in the moment." Of course. As long as the situation allows it, of course. If you are in the thick of battle or incapacitated, I can't postpone decisions to wait for you to respond," he replied, making it clear that the Vale Lord would be respected, but he would never hesitate to act without him. Lord Arryn accepted, albeit reluctantly. "The second condition is that after the war you will sign a treaty ensuring an alliance between our countries, in whatever capacity that may be. This will include mutually favorable trade agreements, the recognition of existing borders and a reward for Houses Marndale, Locke and Flint for helping you in the Civil War. The first 2 points, I can easily agree to. However, I would like to ask what you mean with rewards. The rewards can be worked out in the future. I was thinking about temporary trade benefits for their houses, maybe marriages or trade quarters in 1 or 2 ports. I think they deserve it, after all they have done for the Vale," he simply responded. His ally seemed to be deep in thought about that. "I will discuss it with my lords. I will agree that a certain reward will be given, although I make no promise about its size or capacity." He agreed with that. Those negotiations could be held at a later date. "My third condition is that you swear on this by the old gods and the new," he stated. Both men knew the seriousness of breaking an oath to the gods and thus the severity of this demand. Lord Harold looked him in the eyes and slowly answered. "I, Harold Arryn, swear to fulfill these promises on the old gods and the new." Satisfied, he smiled slightly towards the Vale Lord. Afterwards they talked for another hour about the politics in the army and their respective kingdoms. Both agreed intermarriages could be a good way to ensure their future alliance to hold, although with both of them married and Harold having no siblings or first cousins this would prove difficult to achieve. After Lord Harold left, he continued on his tasks for the upcoming march. 13 days later, they had finally reached Bronze Agate. Their journey had been long and tiresome. However, his efforts had borne fruit. They had passed the Kingswood unopposed. Still, it hadn't been pleasant. The Stormlands proved true to their name, and the constant winds and rains had hindered their progress. In the meantime, it seemed the Targaryen pretender had achieved another victory. Haystack Hall had fallen to their enemies just a few days ago. This meant their army was only around 20 miles away from their current position, a thing he could appreciate. He would rest his army at the castle for a few days and then march to hopefully take them out in one decisive battle. If there was one thing he didn't want, it was an extended campaign all throughout the Stormlands. Ravens from the Citadel had arrived, winter had finally come. It was already snowing in the Vale and Riverlands. It wouldn't be long before they would be bogged down here too. They were already facing ice-cold rainstorms. Snow could extend this campaign with many weeks or even months. A thing he dreaded more than anything. Even so, he couldn't march immediately. His army was exhausted and the reinforcements under Lord Morrigan were delayed by the weather. They were said to be close and could arrive at any moment. The one great victory was the fact House Buckler had at last bowed down to Queen Shireen. The vanguard under Sir Eamon Estermont and Lord Flint and their 2,000 men had played a role in it. More importantly had been the role of the Buckler heir. He seemed much more sympathetic to House Baratheon and the Seven than his father Lord Ralph. In the end, the son had managed to convince the father, even though the latter didn't seem wholly convinced. Whatever the case, he had a warm bed for the night. A thing he greatly looked forward to, although it was only noon. He spent the next few hours talking to his lords and getting briefed on the situation at Bronze Agate by Lord Flint. The stern northern lord had put up a perimeter of scouts and fortified a campsite on a nearby hill. Their much bigger camp would be built around that. Just when night started to fall, horns were blown. They signaled the arrival of Lord Morrigan and his troops. When he went out to greet them, he noticed Lord Davos was there too. It was unexpected, but not unwelcome. He had been dying to meet the man he had heard so much about. After his recent naval victory, his desire to meet him had only increased. There was another man riding next to Lord Davos. He immediately noticed that he wasn't from Westeros. He was tall, thin and had a gaunt-looking face. He was dressed in a big woolen coat, probably gifted to him by the Stormlanders. He had a long beard that seemed to disappear into the folds of his coat. On his head he wore an expensive purple hat, and glimpses of other expensive foreign clothes could be seen under the woolen coat. As he looked at the man, he noticed him looking back at him. Both men silently stared into each other's eyes. After he had greeted Lords Morrigan and Seaworth, Lord Davos introduced him to the man. His name was Tichonestris. He was a representative from the Bank of Bravos. He had wondered how long it would take before the bank would rear its head. It seems that him destroying the Red Keep had been the final straw for them to jump into action. The Bravosi was calm and courteous, addressing him with all the Westerosi protocol expected when meeting a king. He spoke the common tongue fluently, and to his surprise, only a faint accent could be heard. After a while, Lord Buckler invited them inside. The Lord barely hid his disdain when meeting his Lord Regent, although he did acknowledge him as such. Lord Davos didn't seem to mind it. As they ran inside, he saw Lord Morrigan talk to his squire and shock overwhelmed him. The young man looked somewhat like King Robert Baratheon. In honesty, he looked more like the Robert from his father's stories of the rebellion. The lad seemed tall and muscular, and when he noticed him stare, he quickly bowed his head and went to the stables with Lord Morrigan's horse. Lord Davos had seen his look and approached him. "You have a keen eye, King Stark. Gendry is indeed King Robert's son, albeit born on the wrong side of the sheets. The boy shows great promise and he wanted to fight, so I gave him over to the custody of Lord Morrigan. That way he might earn his spurs and make a name for himself." "Make a name for himself? Then I assume this is not the future prince consort?" he responded. "No, that would be his younger half-brother. Edric's mother was a noblewoman from House Florent, Gendry's worked in an alehouse. For the nobility, the choice was clear. Although I must admit Edric will make a finer consort to Shireen than Gendry ever would. He's a great lad, but a bit rough around the edges. He grew up as an orphan in King's Landing and still has difficulty when addressing nobles. I hope this war will make him come around. So, the lad is the Queen's cousin. And the brother to her future consort. He summarized in question. Yes, you could say that. The reply came. He looked towards the back of the tall muscular boy before looking into Lord Davos' brown eyes. If it is to your and Lord Morrigan's liking, I will introduce him to my brother Jon Snow. I think the lad could benefit from meeting someone with a bastard name that has risen high in an army. The slight man looked back at him with a puzzled expression. Of course, I would accept King Rob, but may I ask why you would go to such trouble for a boy you don't know? Someone that isn't even your own subject. He chuckled. His father and my father were like brothers once. Together they overthrew the Targaryen dynasty. I plan to finish what they started and will welcome every Baratheon if they would join me in this. Baseborn or not, I do not care. My father wouldn't, he would care for his friend's son. I will try to honor that memory. The Storm Lord looked at him for a time, before smiling and nodding. Making some more small talk, they went inside. Not too long after, they reached Lord Buckler's solar. They seated themselves and Lord Davos told Lord Ralph to go, a thing which clearly enraged him. Yet, he still did as he was told. They sat together in the solar. 2 Storm Lords, Lord Davos and Lord Morrigan, 2 Valymen, Lord Harold Arryn and Sir Andor Royce, and 2 Northerners, he and Lord Umber. He had wanted Jon to be his right hand, but he was busy fortifying their camp together with Harry while the Blackfish was organizing their scouting network. As such, he had chosen the Great Jon to accompany him. The man had plenty of experience in both warfare and diplomacy, and the giant man had fought together with Lord Morrigan in the rebellion, a thing which seemed to ease any tension between their factions away. After bread and salt were quickly brought in, accompanied by an arbor red from a particularly nice vintage, they got down to business. Lord Davos explained his naval victory in detail and told him that both Tarth and Estermont had now been liberated. Sailors had brought news that Daenerys Targaryen was on her way to Lyse. Her pace had been slowed by storms and she had been forced to go into harbor for a while not far from Volantis, but was now once again on her way. She still hadn't interfered in the Volanten city, which he found most odd. Yet, she hadn't completely remained on the sidelines. It seemed some of the rebelling slaves had been accepted in her army, replenishing her numbers from the losses she had incurred at sea. The news only served as a reminder of how they needed a quick victory over the Pretender. Still, there had also been good news. Lord Melcombe had succeeded in buying a Tiroshi fleet of some 60 warships. They would block the Targaryen princess when she tried to pass through the Stepstones. In turn, he talked to them at length of his plan for the upcoming battle. How they needed to retain momentum and strike quickly at the enemy force. He showed them some of the possible battlefields he envisioned them fighting on. All either between Bronze Egget and Storm's End or between Bronze Egget and Haystack Hall. An hour passed discussing the situation of the war and what they would do with both the Pretender and the Targaryen princess. At last, Lord Davos began to talk about the Iron Bank envoy. How he had wanted Queen Shireen to pay for all, but how that was simply impossible. Lord Seaworth had promised him a meeting with them it seemed, but he agreed with his approach to the situation. He disagreed with his solution. Lord Davos proposed to split it between their kingdoms. A thing he thought to be wholly unfair. It would leave out all their enemies of paying any of the debts. It was a debt of the whole of Westeros and all of it would have to pay. He instead proposed to split the cost of 1,200,000 golden dragons evenly between all 9 regions of Westeros. All regions would have to pay a little over 133,000 dragons. A much more manageable sum. The Vale would pay just that, while he would double it for both the North and the Riverlands. The Crown Lands sum could be split between Houses Stark and Baratheon. This sparked a great debate between them, but in the end they all agreed. In the end Lord Arryn promised to pay his 9th of the debt. House Baratheon would pay a 9th plus 30% of the Crown Lands share. In total some 172,000 dragons. His kingdom would agree to pay just over 350,000 golden dragons. The total sum of 2 regions and 70% of a third. They vowed they would pay not a copper more. This meant that 4/9 of the debt would go unpaid. Lord Harold worried this might bring upon them the ire of the Iron Bank. He didn't agree with that and had rejected the thought, saying the other regions would still have to pay. The Dornish had joined up with the Targaryen pretender. After defeating them, they could put it in the peace treaty as one of their demands. The same would work with the Westerlands and Iron Islands after their defeat. The only possible problem could be the Reach. Yet with the help of the Iron Bank envoy, he might be able to pressure them into action in time. After they had agreed upon their strategy together, they called in the envoy. The exotically dressed banker entered with a neutral expression on his face. He looked upon all of them, clearly recognizing that an agreement had been made between them before his arrival. As such, he gestured for them to make him an offer. "King Stark, Lord Arryn and Lord Seaworth, I can clearly see in your eyes that you wish to propose me a deal. I am listening," he said as he sat down in his chair. He looked upon both his allies before speaking up. "The debt of 1,200,000 golden dragons owed to your bank was not made by any of us but by the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne and everything it ever stood for is gone, including your debt. However, seeing the importance of good relations between Braavos and our kingdoms, we propose a plan to pay off the debt anyway." The face of Tichonestris betrayed nothing, as he gestured for him to continue. "The lands of the Iron Throne once united Westeros. As such, we choose to see the debt as something the whole of Westeros owes you. We are of course part of that, but there are others too. For the last 300 years Westeros has been divided in 9 regions. It is our opinion the debt will need to be divided equally among those regions. 5 of these regions are in our joined hands, as such we propose to pay off 5/9 of the debt to you directly. That would total on 667,000 golden dragons. An interesting idea, yet that would still leave me with 533,000 golden dragons of unpaid debt. Why would I take this offer if I can simply ride across the field to this Aegon if he would agree to pay off the entire sum?" The Braavosi replied seemingly casually. However, there was nothing casual about it. He could see the calculated look behind those eyes. A thing proven by the quick calculation of the remaining sum. "Because if you do that, you won't see a simple copper." He simply shrugged in reply. He would play this little game with him if that's what he wanted. "Why is that?" the banker asked him, his voice as casual as ever. "In a few weeks nothing will remain of the Pretender's force or advisors. We will defeat them and hunt them down. The seas are ours and they have nowhere to go. It's only a matter of time before they all hang from the trees you traveled through to get here. When that happens, there will be no one left to pay you." He simply replied, while biting of a piece of an apple the servants had presented them with. The Braavosi took a pear and silently took a bite out of it as well. "What makes you so sure of your victory? Surely he will tell me the same thing." "Well, if that's true that would make him a fool." He simply shrugged. "We have another 4,000 fresh troops stationed north of here. The seas are ours and Moat Cailin and the Bloody Gate are impregnable from the Riverlands. Even if they defeat us here, war will continue for many months to come. In contrast, if we defeat the Pretender here in the Stormlands, he is finished. He has Dawn." The Braavosi responded. "Aye, that he does. Everybody knows the dangers of attacking the Dornish deserts. My own house almost fell in a succession crisis due to the death of my kinsman Rickon Stark there. Yet, it matters not. The majority of the Dornish army is here. If we defeat it, Doran Martell won't have enough forces to defend his lands. Martell is a smart one, he will broker a peace deal to save his family's power. On the off chance that he doesn't, we simply raise all their coastal settlements with our fleet while tearing down some of their strongholds in the mountains. We could never conquer Dawn, but we will destroy their wealth and defenses and neutralize them for the next 50 years. More than enough time for us to pay back your debt. Your whole plan hinges on the fact you manage to kill or capture this Aegon. If he flees, what then? Besides, destroying Dornish trade would not be in the best interest of my employer. Trade is the main source of income of our great city. Why would we support you in this endeavor?" Nestris retorted. "No, it doesn't. Besides, it will never come to it. Doran Martell will make peace in return for his brother, nieces and daughter who are all in the Stormlands, if we have Aegon or not. He will come to the table to retain his family's power and his hold on Dawn." He replied with a smile. In the following peace deal we could put a clause that the Martells will need to take up 1/9 of the West AOC debt. That would solve a quarter of your problems already. The odd man before him stroked through his long beard. It might. What about the other parts? After the Targaryens are dealt with, we march on the Westerlands. The same clause could be implemented there. In time, the Iron Islands will taste our fury too. The same could be done with them, although it might have to wait until the end of winter. He explained, having expected these questions. What about the Reach? That's the only tricky part. He admitted. None of us have any desire to go on a long gruesome campaign along the Mandaya. However, there are possibilities. The Ironborn are ravaging the Reach at the moment. This will quickly weaken their strength. On top of that, they are in the middle of a civil war. I expect them to be too tired and weakened by the fighting. They will have to settle for peace because of it. If not, some pressure from your bank may persuade them to take the debt on anyway in fear of your retaliation. The Tyrells have never been entirely secure in Highgarden. It wouldn't be too difficult to prop up another claimant, and they know it. The Bravo Sea looked at him in silence. It is an interesting proposal, King Stark. Yet it still hinges on your victory over the Targaryens. Why would I back you? Let's not play these little games, Master Nestris. I haven't lost a single battle yet and have defeated Tywin Lannister, long thought to be the greatest general in Westeros. I have beaten back and decimated the armies of the Reach, and my vassals have thrown the Ironborn from my shores. My allies have defeated another incursion in the Vale and defeated the Targaryens at sea. My numbers are greater than ever, and the majority of them are battle-hardened veterans of many a campaign by now. You know this and I know this. That is why you asked for an audience with us and not the Pretender. It is why you are here. Do not presume me to think you wouldn't be here if you didn't think we would win. A little annoyed, the Asozi man seemed to acknowledge his thoughts. You both support this proposal? He asked his allies. Both men nodded. How would you divide your parts? Surely you wouldn't equally share in the debt with your different strengths? Tycho Nestris asked with a smile. It was clear he wanted to play them out against each other, maybe to get them to pay more than they proposed. We have already agreed upon that. Lord Davos simply replied. You have? The man asked, a little surprised. All three of them nodded. The Vale will simply pay 1/9 necessary as one region of Westeros. In total a little over 133,000 golden dragons. Lord Harold spoke up. The Stormlands will pay 1/9 plus 30% of the Crown Land debt, seeing we will retain the islands of the Narrow Sea and the lands south of the Blackwater. This will total at 172,000 golden dragons. Lord Davos added. We will pay 2/9 for both the North and the Riverlands. In addition, we will pay 70% of the remaining Crown Land debt, as we annexed the more fertile areas of the region. The total sum will be around 350,000 golden dragons. He spoke the last part slowly, to make the Bravo Sea understand how big his part in this was. It seemed the man understood. You pay more than half for your allies, even with your lands ravaged by war. The man tried to chip away at their unity once again. It is only just to do so. Besides, with the funds we have and will continue to reap in the Westerlands, we can repay you easily enough. His message was clear. You need me, not only to pay my own debt but also to force the Westerlands and Iron Isles in submission. Both seemed to understand each other, yet the long-bearded Asozi tried one last time. How will you pay all the other debt? The Iron Throne owed many millions, I was told. Will you pay those in the same manner? He smiled at the weak effort. No, most of those were owed to the Lannisters, Tyrells and the Faith. Those debts are permanently cancelled and are of no consequence to us. The Bravo Sea once again went through his beard in thought. You vow to aid us in collecting the debt from the other regions? He simply replied. His allies also agreed. I believe we might come to an agreement then. Although I would like to look it over once more before we put it on paper. A sigh of relief came from his left, where Lord Harold was sitting. He internally groaned at the inexperience of the man to show his emotions like that. However, it didn't seem to have any consequences. They respectfully bowed to each other and agreed to finalize the details on the morrow. Once everyone was gone, he sat back down at Lord Butler's desk. He pulled out the maps of the surrounding areas once more and started checking his future battle plans for possible weaknesses. After a few minutes, he was disturbed by a knock on the door. Upon his call, a guardsman stuck his head inside. "What is it, Winder?" he asked the veteran who had fought with him in all his battles so far. "Lord Nestris is back here, Your Grace. Says he wants to discuss some more details." "Let him in," he simply responded. "Ah, King Rob. Excuse me my simple SOZ tricks, but I had the feeling you and I had more to discuss in private." The man explained his presence. "What may that be?" he asked, although this had been his plan from the start. He hadn't thought he would come back so quickly though. "Well, your importance in this plan is not to be understated. You will pay a little of over a third of the debt yourself, and it is clear you are the man I need to talk to if I want the parts owed by your enemies repaid. Now I ask you, what is it you want?" The Bravo C simply responded, lifting his right eyebrow in the process. He smiled at the apparent bluntness of the question. He always felt more at ease with a blunt demand rather than sweet-powered words and suggestions. "Trade, I want trade. I will need to feed my kingdom through the coming winter. The North lacks food as it always has, and the Riverlands' fields and stocks are largely destroyed. We have managed to replenish some of the stores and animal stock with what we raided in the Westerlands, but it is not enough. Especially not without the export the Riverlands normally promise the North. You want a preferential trade agreement for our food exports?" The man mused, his hands once again finding the way to his large beard. "I and a good price for it too. In return, I promise you the payment of 8/9 of the West AOC debt without any effort on your end. I also offer you the future markets of the North, the Riverlands and the former Crown lands. In the past, you only had to deal with King's Landing. Now, you will have to deal with many different kings, tariffs and markets. I promise you access to over half of West Aos. I give you White Harbor, Maidenpool and Duskendale. I give you access to the Blackwater and the river systems of the Riverlands." "Not King's Landing?" the man asked, surprised. "The city will be greatly reduced in importance. In time, I plan for Duskendale to outshine it. It will be a border town in my kingdom, instead of the beating heart of a continent. Yet, if you wish it, you will have access to it." Tycho Nestris nodded. "A big proposal. You offer much for a simple food agreement throughout winter." "Not simply for this winter. For every winter there is to come. In addition, I would also like a general trade agreement. I have some things you and your city want. We can sell it to you over any others, if you allow our traders entry to your docks," he replied. "What may those things be?" the Bravo C asked, clearly intrigued. "Wood, your trading fleets need constant replenishments and your native forests have long been diminished. The North has it in abundance. Be it around Carhold, in the Hornwood, the Wolfswood or other places. We could supply you with wood for 1,000 years without noticing it. On top of that, we can supply furs. Bravos is a little more to the south than Winterfell, but from what I hear the cold sea winds still bother you in winter. There should be a great market for thick northern fur with the coming cold. I'm impressed, King Stark. How long have you been planning this?" the banker asked him. For a while he laughed. He had spent many hours talking about it with Jon and the Mandaealis on the march to Bronze Egget. He knew this was his one chance to help his homeland. If this deal worked as he intended, they would not only recover much faster from the fighting that happened there. He would also be able to curb the historic population losses they always suffered in winter. He dreamed that it would be a first step to grow the population of the North. If he wanted to strengthen the areas on the western shores and the new gift, he would have to repopulate them. He couldn't do that if the population fell back once again. "I can tell." "Well, Bravos would of course welcome such an agreement. However, I would need to have the agreement of the Sea Lord before it could come into effect. I am in a position to negotiate a possible treaty, but not in any position to ratify it." "I understand. Yet, I believe it to be in the Sea Lord's best interests to accept, especially after the loss of large markets in West Aos, albeit momentarily." "Yes, it might be. To make things clear, You expect a preferential position for your kingdom in our exports for food during the following winters. Let's say a term of 60 years, with a possibility to extend it after that. In return, you propose the same in exchange for furs during winter and wood all year round. You also expect a general trade agreement, I predict, with reduced tariffs on both sides. On top of that, you will open your towns and ports to us, if we do the same. That's about it. I can even sweeten the deal a little more," he added. "How so?" the man asked, clearly interested. "I can offer you the same agreement with the Night's Watch. They have more wood than they know what to do with. It could diminish your dependency on your own lands and neighbors even more in this regard. They are absent from any conflicts between kings and squabbles over lands. It would mean an uninterrupted and guaranteed influx of logs for eternity if you wish it to be so. It could, but it would also slightly lower your exports." "Why do this?" the banker asked. "The Night's Watch is a shell of its former self. When it fails, it is House Stark's duty to pick up the pieces. All coin they make themselves is less me and my lords would need to pay for it to sustain itself. Besides, the forests have come too close to the wall, or so I have been told. It would be much more secure if more of it was cut down. The stronger the order, the less worries for me and mine. If it costs me a bit of coin, so be it." He shrugged at the end. "I understand. I agree to the general premise of the proposal. I propose we meet again here in 3 days to finalize the numbers. I need to talk to some of my accountants and need to take a look at our trade in food, fur and wood before I can discuss the numbers. Besides, on the morrow we need to sign the debt agreement. Some work needs to be done for that as well." He mused over the proposal. His army would need to rest for a few days, and 3 days wasn't too long. Besides, he would need to discuss it with his lords. First and foremost, House Marndale, but the Carstocks, Umbers, Glovers and others about the fur and wood trade too. He would also like to talk to representatives of Houses Riker, Mouton and Cox. The ports of Duskendale, Maidenpool and Solpans could be important in this deal as well. He would also have to talk with his uncles. As their overlords, the Tullys might know more about their trading history. I agree. In 3 days, right after breakfast if it pleases you," he replied. "It does." In a very UNSOZ manner. The banker clasped his hand. "It is a pleasure doing business with you, King Stark. I hope this to be the start of very good relations between my employer and your house." "As do I, Master Nestris," he responded, while nodding his head, somewhat mimicking the traditional Bravo Sea greeting. Chapter 54, A Meeting Between Brothers. John. He walked towards the pavilion that had been raised for the occasion. Around it stood 30 guards from either side. Their best fighters, often nobles, had been chosen for the task. He saw the small John, Owen Norrie, Lucas Blackwood and many other friends who had taken up positions in full armor. He himself would accompany Robb inside. Robb had been adamant about this. In private, he had even joked that there should be at least one true Targaryen at the meeting. He had struggled on what to do with his heritage today. Of course, he couldn't announce it to anyone or do something visible. Yet, he had still wanted to do something. In the end he had attached Roriger's sigil ring, which had been in the package gifted to him by Lord Reed, to a golden chain around his neck. The chain was well hidden beneath his tunic, but it helped strengthen his resolve to meet the man impersonating his death brother. His clothes were in the colors he had grown used to wearing. His tunic was black with a running direwolf in white stitched upon it. To top it off, he wore grey trousers. The outfit marked him clearly as a member of House Stark, while still showing him as different. Under it, he wore a light chainmail vest. Better to be safe than sorry, Robb had told him. At his side hung his sword. It was made of basic northern steel and was kept in a modest scabbard. However, it had done his job so far. There would be a time where he could wear some of the stuff they had captured from the Red Keep, but now wasn't it. As they neared the pavilion, he could make out the enemy's guards. An interesting bunch of Dornishmen, mercenaries from the Golden Company and 2 knights in the unmistakable armor of the Kingsguard. Both looked young and he wondered who they were. The King's Guard were supposed to be some of the best fighters in Westeros. If those men had received white cloaks, they had to be fierce opponents in the coming battle. When they walked inside, he could see the company the Pretender had brought with him. The Pretender had proposed that both he and Robb bring 7 advisors. His brother had cringed at the use of that number again. In the privacy of their rooms, he had sworn to him he would end the zealous use of the number 7 in his kingdom. When the war was over, he would abolish every institution or custom that take place with that number. He knew Robb wasn't the only Northman to be annoyed by it, but they couldn't do anything for now if they didn't want to anger their allies. Robb had nonetheless proposed to bring 8 advisors, supposedly because of their large number of allies. The enemy had accepted this. Robb had chosen him to be his right hand. From the north, he had brought Lords Umber and Karstark with him. From the Riverlands came Sir Brynden and Lord Mallister. From the Vale came Lord Harold and Sir Andor Royce. For the Stormlands, Lord Davos was in attendance. The company had been thought out well. Robb had been adamant that the forces left behind should be under capable leadership. As such, Lords Morrigan, Bracken, Bolton, Mallory and Lady Mormont were left back in control of the camp, together with Sir Wylis Marndaly and Sir Morton Waynwood. He looked over the advisors brought by the Pretender and heard some of the older lords in their company gasp. They were looking upon a plump, bald and somewhat effeminate man. He was dressed in rich silks of purple and pink. On his face was a knowing grin, as if he knew more than anyone else in the room. "Varys," he heard the great Jon spit out. Similar mutterings could be heard from Sir Brynden, Sir Andor and Lord Mallister. This surprised him. They had noticed the absence of the eunuch in the Red Keep but hadn't expected him to be here of all places. The spymaster simply smiled and greeted them all by name in response. When his own name was called out, he saw the Pretender flinch, but nothing was said. The Pretender looked majestic and every inch a descendant of Valyria. His eyes were dark pools of blue, which seemed to shimmer violet as the light hit his eyes. His hair was pale blonde, almost silver and of a beauty he had rarely seen before. His face was symmetrical and he possessed high cheekbones. His father must have looked similar like that, and it was understandable how his mother could have fallen for it. He knew he had his father's lean build, and the fact that grace came easily to him was because of him. He had also stared in the looking glass for hours these last months, and in very specific circumstances his dark grey eyes seemed to take on a purplish shine. Save for those things, he was all stark. When he looked deeper, he tried to find similarities between the young man in front of him and himself or Rhaegar, but in vain. The Valyrian ancestry was clear, but nothing clearly marked him as his father's son. He did notice the sword hanging from his hip and looked at it in awe. He recognized the handle out of the drawings from the books. It was Blackfyr, the famed sword of Aegon the Conqueror. The sword had been lost with Igor Bittersteel when he had founded the Golden Company. It seemed the company had given it to Aegon to support his claim. It was then he finally looked upon the other advisors the Pretender had brought with him. To his left stood a man around 40 years of age. His face was leathery and clean-shaven. His hair was mostly grey with a red shine to it. He wore a tabard with 2 combatant griffins on it. This was unmistakably Jon Connington. On the other side stood a salty Dornishman, dressed in the orange of House Martell with a cloak of pale red silk flowing from his shoulders. The man's eyes looked up at him and he smiled a dangerous-looking smile. Oberyn Martell looked just as menacing as the stories told, and he noted himself to be wary of the man. Next to Lord Connington stood another man, dressed in the finery of the Golden Company. The older man looked portly, with a big round head. Still, he seemed to carry an important function among the sellswords. Next to him was another sellsword, a big-bellied hulk of a man. He was missing his left ear and most of his right one. Across his arm he wore over a dozen golden rings, proving his long-term presence among the sellswords. Next to Oberyn Martell stood another man, around 50 years of age. He had blonde hair that had almost completely turned grey. His blue eyes were observant and alert. His tabard proudly showed the sigil of House Euronwood, arguably the most important Dornish house after the Martells. Lastly, 2 others made up the company. These made for some more commotion, as the first scoffed at the presence of the Onion Knight in their presence. His sigil betrayed him as Lord Fell, a Storm Lord that had been notably absent at Bronze Egget. Next to him stood an old reclord, who Sir Bryndon quickly identified as Lord Cockshaw. It seemed the pretender had managed to gather some more West AOC support, limited as it may be. This explained the reports they had received from their scouts this morning. They had reported the enemy army to have around 28,000 men. It was known Doran Martell had sent some 15,000 Dornishmen north under his brother, and the Golden Company probably counted 7 to 8,000 men here. Some of their men were still stuck on the stepstones, while others were garrisoning castles or had been lost in the campaign or storm. The other 5 to 6,000 men had been unaccounted for, but now they knew where they came from. Lords Fell and Coxor would only be the major lords joining the pretender. A score of minor lords and landed knights from the regions probably followed their lead. Rob and the pretender stood in front of each other and seemed to be sizing each other up. Whereas the pretender wore but a simple golden band on his head, seeing he hadn't officially been crowned yet, Rob wore his winter crown, made of iron and copper in the liking of those of the kings of winter. For a moment, none of them said a word. Finally, Rob spoke up. "I propose we all take a seat." All nobles nodded and took their places, he himself taking his seat at his brother's right side. Egon spoke up next. "Let me introduce you to my advisors, my lords. To my right is Lord John Connington, my hand of the king. To my left is my uncle, Sir Oberyn Martell, and my master of laws. Next to my uncle is Lord Varys, my master of whisperers. Next to my hand are Sir Harry Strickland, Captain General of the Golden Company, and one of his senior officers, Sir Franklin Flowers. On the other end are some of my loyal lords, Lords Fell and Coxor." Rob silently nodded at each of them, before introducing his own company. "To my right is seated my brother, John. To my left I have the pleasure of having the company of Lord Harold Arryn. Next to my brother you can find my brother-in-law Lord Harry on Carstark, followed by Lord John Umber and finally Lord Davos Seaworth, Regent for Her Grace Queen Shireen Baratheon. Next to Lord Arryn, you find Sir Andor Royce, the heir to Runestone, Sir Bryndon Tully, my great-uncle, and Lord Jason Mallister." None at the table could deny the influence those names brought with them. 3 of the great houses were present, as well as the regent for a 4th. Besides that, you had representatives of houses Royce, Mallister, Carstark and Umber, all major vassals in their respective regions. The only true outcast at this side of the table was him, but Rob had been adamant he should be here. More so, he had practically forced him to take the seat as his right hand. Not so long ago, he would have dreaded the idea, now he just resigned himself to the plan. He had long accepted his fate as a bastard, but it seemed his brother never had. Things had gotten worse ever since he had promised him a lordship back home. Every day he was being told to start acting like a lord, as he would soon be one. He had tried to do so, and even though he still didn't feel entirely comfortable around some of their Vale and Stormland allies, he had long since been accepted by the nobles of the North and Riverlands. As such, his anxiousness had lessened over time. "Welcome to all of you, especially Lords Stark and Arryn. The pretender greeted, clearly trying to take the initiative in the conversation. However, his first words couldn't be more of a mistake. "It's King Stark to you and anyone else who asks." The Great Jon grunted out angrily. His blunt comment seemed to surprise some at the other table, while Sir Oberyn looked on with interest. "Ah, yes, your so-called independence." Egon tried to answer, not wanting to lose control of the situation. "So-called. The Lords of the North proclaimed Robb Stark our king over a year ago beneath the godswood of Riverrun. We swore our oaths before our gods. We won't go back on those." Harry On answered, to the agreement of Lord Umber. As did the Lords of the Riverlands, not an hour later. "None of us will stray from our oaths either." Lord Jason Mallister added, clearly with the support of the Blackfish. Robb bowed himself closer to the pretender. "As you can see, my crown is not here for show or the use of mere titles. I did not take any throne myself, nor did I stake any claims. I was proclaimed king by my lords and people. A duty and burden which I took upon me and have been carrying out for well over a year now. I will not turn my back on the trust they showed in me, nor will I shy away from my duty. For that, I must ask you to address me by the correct title, lest you anger my vassals further." To all at the table, it was clear what was happening. While the pretender had wanted to take charge of the situation and prove himself above the other, Robb had placed himself right next to the man in the conversation instead of below him. It had been a handy ploy by Harry and Lord Jason to proclaim Rob like that, as it deflected any notion of his brother wanting to protect his crown for power. This clearly angered the silver-haired man, as well as some of his advisors. "You can't be serious, Lord Stark. Ever since the coming of Aegon the Conqueror, the kingdoms have been united. You wish to undo that unity all on your own. You think you can hold all of the other kingdoms off by yourself." Lord Connington spoke up. Aegon the Conqueror united these kingdoms, that much is true. However, the men at this table undid all that already. Besides, I am not alone. To the right over there, sits Lord Davos Seaworth, as I mentioned before. He is the Lord Regent for Her Grace Queen Shireen Baratheon, Queen of the Storm Kingdom and the Narrow Sea. Next to me sits Lord Harold Arryn, who has sworn never to bow down to a descendant of Aegon the Dragon ever again. On top of that, I can tell you I have complete control of almost 3 entire kingdoms myself. My kingdom runs from the Wall down to the Blackwater River. From the gold-rich hills of the Westerlands to the mountains of the Vale and Cracklaw Point. I am not alone, and what is done cannot be undone, Lord Connington. Both Lord Davos and Lord Harold seemed to appreciate his comments well enough, as they both nodded along with his statements. His brother had skillfully bypassed the question of the Vale's sovereignty without anyone noticing it, a thing he would congratulate him on later. "What is this talk about crowning yourself? I am Aegon Targaryen, the son Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell. I am the one true heir to the Iron Throne, the ruler of the Andals, the Rhoynar and the First Men. The 7 kingdoms are mine by right. By proclaiming yourself king you attaint yourself a rebel and a traitor to the laws your ancestors swore to uphold." Rob simply grinned at the outburst. "The laws of the Iron Throne cannot be broken, as the Iron Throne is no more." This brought many a chuckle at their side of the table. All remembered the hauntingly beautiful scene of the Red Keep going up in a great green flash. This finally broke the patience of many on the other side, with many starting to shout. "It is true then that you blew up the Red Keep?" The Red Viper asked him, except for Lord Varys, the only one who had remained calm. "Aye, the time of dragons is over," Rob simply replied. After this, him and the Dornishman locked eyes for a few seconds before the latter started to smile. "I like this one. I will enjoy fighting you on the battlefield to see if you will still be so bold then. One of the benefits of being the king in the north is the fact he can have me fight for him, Viper." Lord Umber replied, an equally vicious grin on his face. These men were ready for battle, that was clear. All of this was a simple formality for them, a procedure they had to get through before they inevitably crossed their blades together. However, not all shared that same feeling. "What gave you the right to do so?" "My family gave peace and prosperity to these lands. We unified Westeros under a single banner and purpose. How small-minded can you be to want to go back to a time where everyone fought each other?" The pretender simply called out. At that moment, he could see it in his eyes. This man had been brought up on fairy tale stories of the greatness of the Targaryen legacy. He truly believed he was doing the people a favor by pursuing his claim. Realizing half the continent detested you must be a shock. At the remark, Rob turned dark. "Peace and prosperity, you say? Which peace are we talking about then? Let me see, are you talking about the vicious wars of conquest of your namesake, where he burned 1,000-year-old noble families to ashes? Or are you talking about the uprisings of the faith militant because half the continent despised your incestuous customs? Maybe you are talking about the destructive civil wars your family fought out, while using the nobility of Westeros as your pawns, such as the Dance of Dragons or the multiple Blackfyre rebellions? Or are you talking about the senseless wars of conquests on the Stepstones or in Dorne your supposed kin fought out? The latter brought an end to my kinsman Rickon Stark, throwing my house in disarray for 2 generations. However, that was nothing compared with what my father had to endure under the Mad King's reign. He lost his father and elder brother to that sick maniac's torture, while his sister died all alone in the mountains of Dorne. A house that has ruled in the north for nigh on 8,000 years, almost wiped out because of the raving delusions of an incestuous madman. Is this the Targaryen peace you speak of?" It hurt him to hear Rob speak about his ancestors like that, but he knew it to be true. He thought back on what his brother had told him when they had discussed it among themselves months before. "You are as much a Stark as you are a Targaryen, Jon, if not more. All those cruelties were not just inflicted by your kin. They were also inflicted upon your other kin. You are the descendant of both sides, as such you can share no blame. You are not only the grandson of the Mad King. You are also the grandson of Rickard Stark, who he brutally tortured and murdered. You can choose which side you want to be on, John. You can decide your own destiny. When he replayed those words in his head, his mind calmed. Rob was right, he could choose who he wanted to be. He had chosen. He was of the North. He had chosen to follow the ways of his mother's kin and would continue to do so. The Pretender looked shocked at his brother's sudden outburst, but Rob wasn't done yet. Besides, what is this Targaryen prosperity you speak of? Is it old men getting fat in a capital so corrupt no honorable man could ever survive it? Is it a capital from which you could smell the shit and piss from miles away? Or is it the Night's Watch deteriorating so badly that the lands of the Gift and those of House Umber and the clans now get regularly raided by wildlings? Maybe it is old men in the north going hunting in the woods in the middle of winter to never come back so their sons and grandsons might have enough food to survive winter. That all the while those same men are still getting fat in their capital. Tell me, Egon, what is it you mean by the peace and prosperity your family gave us? The Pretender stood there with his mouth wide open, clearly in shock. Many of his advisors, even Sir Oberyn, seemed taken aback by the anger and viciousness with which Rob had condemned the Targaryen dynasty. Even Lord Arryn seemed to get slightly uncomfortable from it. Many in the Seven Kingdoms had forgotten how heavily the Starks had suffered under Targaryen rule, or they hadn't cared. Rob hadn't even spoken of the slight of breaking the Pact of Ice and Fire or how they had been forced to give away parts of their lands with the new gift, let alone how they had to deal with wildling invasions and the Skagasi uprising all on their own. However, the grim face of the Great Jon told everyone how no one in the north had forgotten about what had happened to their lord and his heir in King's Landing. The time of the dragons is over. Your throne and keep are gone, your capital is almost completely gone and the dragon pit is being demolished as we speak. Westeros doesn't want your peace and prosperity. You can keep it. His brother ended his argument, spitting the last sentences out as if he didn't even want to possess those words on his lips. Seeing as no one on his side replied anything, Lord Varys spoke up for the first time. Now come, that doesn't seem entirely truthful even to you, Lord Stark. Under the Targaryens, White Harbor grew into a powerhouse, the right of the First Night was abandoned, a unified code of law was made to ensure equal treatment of all men from all regions, conflicts between regions were discouraged and I can go on. It is true some unnecessary conflicts were fought, but aren't you a bit hard seeing that you have been fighting a war for over a year now yourself? Rob simply looked at the eunuch. My father was right about you, Lord Varys, was all he said. Oh, and what did he tell you about me? The spider responded, his little smile never wavering. That Robert should have taken your head instead of keeping you on as spymaster. It seemed he should have listened, seeing that you once again surround yourself with Targaryens. Although I must admit I had expected to find you with Daenerys Stormborn, not this pretender of doubtful ancestry. Rob answered. Doubtful ancestry? Are you calling me a liar? Egon almost screeched. The sound he made had more resemblance to that of a crow than that of a dragon. Personally, he had enough of this whole spectacle. This impostor was making a laughingstock of his father's kin. As much as he didn't want to be like any of them, they still deserved better than a silver-haired boy thinking the world belonged to him because some lord told him so and a bunch of dubious exiled mercenaries called himself king. That's what we all say. He spoke up. Rob looked at him with a frown but didn't signal him to stop speaking. You come here to Westeros, saying you are the dead son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell, but who is to say you speak the truth? He looked upon all the men on the other side of the table. An exiled lord, long thought to have drank himself to death. He said, as he looked to Lord Connington. A spymaster, known so well for his lying and scheming that they called him the Spider. However, much more damning is the fact he has now changed sides 2 times and supposedly betrayed Rhaegar's plans to change the country to his mad father Aerys at Harrenhal. Very believable that he would not only save, but also raise and now support his son. He continued, as he looked upon Lord Varys with his eyebrow raised. Or maybe a bunch of 4th or 5th generation exiles, known to have fought House Targaryen at every step to place a black fear on the throne. he ended, whilst looking at the members of the Golden Company. For a man with an already shady claim at best, you do surround yourself with dubious figures. The only man that gives any credibility to your claim is Sir Oberyn Martell there, he said while lazily pointing at the Dornish knight. Although even that can be discredited by the news you have announced that you will marry his niece. It doesn't matter if you are his nephew or not, the next generation will have Martell blood flowing through them all the same. The small smile he got from the Red Viper told them all they needed to know. That was exactly how Doran Martell was seeing this situation, and it was laughable that the young man in front of him didn't realize that. The silver-haired man got another reaction, however. It was clear that he was already fuming with rage, but after loud support for his statements by many of the lords on his side, the pretender cracked. Who are you to dare to call my legitimacy into question? You, the son of a traitor by some random camp follower during the War of the Usurper. Your father didn't even care about your mother long enough to recite her name, let alone care for her after stealing you away. You dare call my parentage into question? Aegon fumed, his head turning red, which gave quite the comical view in contrast with his silver hair and deep blue-violet eyes. He simply scoffed at the outburst. There might have been a time where it would have deterred him, but that was long gone. This boy was more than likely the son of some Lyseni whore, used by the fabrications of men like Lord Varys to serve their purpose. He had withstood the ire of Lady Catelyn and Lord Edmure Tully, had proven the Riverlands nobility wrong, and now led them into battle. He would not cower for this man who dared to buffer his father's memory even further. To your information, I know perfectly well who my mother is, and she was no camp follower. Besides that, the only thing that my father ever betrayed were his marriage vows. He scoffed, looking the pretender deep in his eyes. I have to take no comments from you. Everybody can see that you are no son of Rhaegar. You pride yourself on having his looks, but if you look closely you don't resemble him at all. Your eyes are violet, looking almost deep blue, while his were a dark shade of purple. His build was lean and graceful, yours not so much. It's very convenient you just happen to arrive in Westeros when the continent is at war to reclaim your birthright. If you ask me, you are either the son of a Lyseni whore or some distant Blackfyre relative. The latter would at least explain the presence of the Golden Company at this table. At this the silver-haired boy threw back his chair, while reaching for the Valyrian steel sword at his hip. However, he was quickly restrained by the two veteran warriors at his side. The presence of that sword only helps the latter theory, as no Targaryen has wielded that sword in battle since the young dragon's idiotic attempt to conquer Dorne. You might not be a complete mummus dragon, but you are no true Targaryen either. By now, both sides were clearly on edge. All had their hands on their swords, and the tension in the room was almost visible. The only man in the room without a weapon bowed himself towards him and asked. You said you know who your mother was, Jon Snow. I am very interested to hear who and what she was, if she was in fact no camp follower. He exhaled a bit too loudly at that. Of course, Lord Varys had caught on to the hidden meaning behind those words. Robb looked at him and signaled him that he would take over now, but he looked back into the eyes of his brother. He was done hiding. He knew what kind of person he was and what he wanted to be. He was no incestuous lunatic, he was of the North as much as Robb was. Yet, he couldn't keep running away from where he came from. Robb's mother was of the Riverlands, yet nobody had doubted his worth as a Northman since he had proven himself in battle. Why would he have to be different? Why did he have to hide? Why did he have to suffer this impostor befooling his heritage, whilst looking down on him in the process? His brother looked in his eyes and recognized what he was going to do. Are you sure? He whispered. He nodded in his response. Silently, he asked permission from his brother, best friend and king to go ahead. Robb looked long and hard in his eyes before nodding slightly. Both turned back to Lord Varys, who was looking with interest upon the scene between the two brothers. He wasn't the only one, as almost everyone was looking at him once again. He looked over the faces of his friends and war companions and sighed. He closed his eyes for a second and opened them again, looking straight into the eyes of the eunuch. My mother was Lyanna Stark. She died in the mountains of Dorne, giving birth to me at the end of the rebellion. She was no ordinary camp follower, but the daughter of a great house. One so beloved, her brother fought a rebellion partially to get her back. He responded seriously. The eyes of the eunuch turned very big at that, as did those of Conington and Martel. The pretender didn't realize the full meaning of his words yet, as he was still too consumed by his anger. "Ha, you dare insult my ancestors for being incestuous, while your own brother slept with his sister to produce you. You're the incest bastard of a traitor." He laughed cruelly, but nobody joined him. Everybody had heard the story of how his father had supposedly abducted his mother. Most had realized what it meant if Lyanna was his mother. He looked hard into those blue-violet eyes, before responding. "Eddard Stark was a great man, who I'm proud to be able to call my father. He took me in and raised me as one of his own. He called me his bastard son and bore the shame of that for 15 years just to save my life. Alas, he was not my real father, but my uncle." He paused for a second, letting the words he would now speak sink into anyone who could hear it. "My real father was Rhaegar Targaryen. He never abducted my mother. They planned to run away together after Harrenhal, and so they did. They married under a weirwood tree on the shore of the God's Eye in front of the old gods and repeated the ceremony with a septon on the morrow. Whether you accept the marriage as legitimate or not, it doesn't matter. I am the last living child of Rhaegar Targaryen and the possible heir to his claims. Not you, who just washed up from Essos a few months ago thinking you could rule it all just because somebody falsely told you your father was a prince." Even before he had stopped speaking, the whole pavilion turned into a shouting match. Completely chaos erupted, as men from both sides started shouting at him. From his right, Harry looked hard at him and then at Robb. He finally asked him under his breath, "Do you have proof of this?" I have the marriage contract and a letter from my mother. It was gifted to me by Lord Reed, who kept it safe for years." He responded honestly. His friend seemed to accept this. "Do you plan to claim any of it? You were there when the Red Keep was blown up." I don't want a crown nor any lands south of the Neck. I swore an oath to Robb, I intend to keep it. Any descendants of mine will do the same." Harry just silently nodded at that, deep in thought but seemingly satisfied for now. Around them the shouting hadn't stopped. The Great Jon screamed and Lord Jason Mallister and Sir Andor Royce seemed enraged as well. Not a surprise, seeing as they both lost kin when his uncle Brandon had ridden to King's Landing to demand his sister back. One who was notably silent was Lord Conington. He seemed to whisper something to himself. Only after looking at him for a few seconds, it dawned on him what he was mumbling. The dragon must have 3 heads. He looked deep into the eyes of the exiled Stormlord. Apparently he wanted me to be his Vizier. Instead, he got another son. My mother named me Jaehaerys Targaryen, after the Consolator. This completely enraged the Great Jon, as that had been the man who had taken the lands of the new gift from his family. Shouting was heard all around and it looked as if both sides would soon come to blows. Guards stormed in from both sides and he saw how Smalljon was struggling to hold back his father from tearing anyone close to him to shreds. Robb was trying to keep his vassals calm, while ordering the guards to surround both of them and protect him from friend and foe alike. "Do you have any proof of this?" Lord Varys asked. "I have their marriage contract, signed by them and their septon. I also have a letter from my mother explaining the situation." He responded, loud enough for all to hear this time. Documents that can easily be forged." One of the Golden Company men dismissed him loudly, as all men that remained seated stood up. "I also have this." He spoke up, as he pulled the chain from under his tunic. Hanging there was the sigil ring of Rhaegar Targaryen. "It was the only thing Rhaegar ever left me." He pulled it from the chain and slid it on his finger, waving the engraved 3-headed dragon for all to see. This seemed to stun not only Lord Varys, but Lord Conington and Sir Oberyn as well. The last one started to rage how that filthy dragon prince had once again humiliated his sister, while running out of the pavilion. Lord Conington just looked at him in shock, clearly trying to find something of Rhaegar in him. Lord Varys quickly came to his senses and tried to salvage the situation. The Starks have become mad. First, they declare their independence and now they try to put one of their own on the throne. Good lords, this meeting is over. We will show them our right on the field of battle tomorrow. He put his arm around the pretender and walked him outside, most of the others following. Only 2 lingered, Old Lord Cocksaw took a long hard look at him, before turning back and following the much younger Lord Fell, who had already left. That once again left Lord John Connington. The man seemed paralyzed, as he looked from him over completely, only briefly looking away to glance at his father's ring. After a long while, way too long, he realized where he was and quickly left the tent. This didn't ease any of the tension, as Rob grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him out of the tent. Around them was a ring of stark household guard, as most noble guards were being told by either Lord Umber or Lord Mallister what was going on and were reacting to it in much the same way. After they got a safe distance away from their meeting place, the Great Jon couldn't hold it in anymore. He threw his giant son to the floor and stomped towards him. He barely looked at the 3 guards moving to stop him. He swathed them away like flies, before grabbing him by the neck. "Was it true what you said there, boy?" he screamed in his face. It was," he said, as evenly as possible. Not an easy thing, seeing as the looming figure of the head of House Umber seemed ready to snap his neck at any moment. "You're telling me I lost 2 of my cousins at the damn Trident for naught? That Roriger didn't abduct Lyanna? That Ned lied to all of us of who you were and the situation in the south just to be able to crown that damned Robert? No, not that." He struggled to get out, as the hand on his neck was squeezing too tightly. At that point, Rob had drawn out ice and held it to the Great Jon's neck. "Let go of my brother, Lord Umber, now." The Great Jon loosened his grip on him but didn't pull away and ignored their king entirely. "Well then. Speak, you thrice damned fool. Roriger didn't abduct Lyanna, but my uncle never knew that until after the rebellion when he found my mother in Dawn. He and Lord Reed are the only ones who knew. They did lie to everyone about me though. Lord Reed told me my father, Lord Eddard, was afraid Robert would have had me killed otherwise. He got out. Ned was probably right about that. You say he didn't know when we marched south?" He nodded in response. "Good, couldn't have forgiven Ned if that was the case. And you? Have you marched south with us all this time to try and lay claim to that ugly throne of yours? Why the hell did you let us blow it up then?" No, I didn't know myself, I swear," he blurted out. "How come you know now then?" The angry giant just scoffed. "Lord Reed told me in Riverrun, before the Battle of Atlanta. Before that I had no idea, I swear it on the old gods." "So, you mean to say that at the Battle of the Whispering Wood, our whole campaign in the Westerlands, when I followed your command, you knew nothing of this? You were just following his grace down to save Ned and later avenge him?" The Great Jon spat in his face. Rob had slowly started pressing the great sword in the man's neck, but he didn't react. Not even when a few drops of blood came from under the blade. Guards tried to restrain him, but he just bodied them away without letting him go. Of course. That's what I'm still doing. I don't want any of it. I don't want the throne, the titles. I don't want any of it. I was there when we blew up the Red Keep just as much as you were." He gasped. You were?" The giant lord responded, squinting his eyes. "If that's not what you want, what do you want? Your father came from these lands, why not try to rule them? To live in the north in peace. I want to go home, the north is my home. My mother was of the north and I was raised in Winterfell and White Harbor all my life. Rob promised me a keep and lands of my own. I want to marry a good northern woman, father some legitimate children and live in peace. Maybe see them play with the children of my siblings, our cousins. I'm not interested in anything south of the neck, I just want this war to be over so I can start a life in the north far away from the taints of bastardry or dragons. I renounce any claims to any titles or lands not given to me by my brother." This seemed to somewhat placate the Great Jon, as he loosened him some more. "And your descendants? I will renounce any of their claims as well. If Rob finds it necessary, I will have them swear it to him and his sons too when the time comes." He quickly answered. He had thought about this long and hard. This was what he wanted. The Umber giant let go of him and turned to Rob. Only now seemingly noticing the blade. The Great Jon just lifted his eyebrow at ice cutting into his flesh. "Will you behead me for this, your grace? If you manage to calm down, leave my brother alone and stop hitting my guard, I might not." Rob grunted out. "Very well, as you command, your grace," he responded, as he let some of the guards restrain him. One of them was his own son. Seeing how Smalljan's whole tunic was dirted by mud he had thrown him in, the great Jon laughed and apologized himself. He turned back to Rob. "How long have you known?" He decided to answer for his brother, as he did not want any quarrel to happen between him and his vassals because of him. "I told him after the Battle of Atlanta." He did." His brother took over, gesturing that he would take care of this himself. "I told him that he could do as he wanted, but that I would not bow to him. I gave him the same answer I gave the pretender. You gave me my crown and I accepted it. I will not betray that trust or shy away from its duties." In the end, Jon decided for himself he did not want the throne. "All I did was keep some books and heirlooms from the Red Keep aside to give to him when he received his own lands in the north," his brother explained without flinching, as he put ice away on his back. "So, what now?" Lord Umber responded at last, after a moment of silence. "Now, we prepare for battle against our enemy tomorrow. Nothing has changed, Jon still serves me. We have known for months, only your knowledge has changed. He knew when he fought with us at Atlanta, we both knew when we defeated the Lannisters at God's Eye, and we both knew when we took King's Landing and later on the Red Keep. You followed his commands then and you will follow them again now if I tell you to do so," Rob replied with a finality in his tone. The great Jon looked long and hard at him, before nodding and stalking away with his son. He heard him saying something to himself in passing like, "I need to have a good word with Howland tonight." Most of the nobles of his guard had heard the exchange. They looked weirdly at him, but no one said anything. In fact, most northerners seemed to follow the great Jon back to camp. At last Harry On stepped forward. "I think we can use this to our advantage, your grace." "How so?" their king replied. "Have you seen the looks on the faces of the enemy? Most of them believe Jon, despite Varys' best efforts to discredit him in the end. Some, like Lords Coxor, Fell and even Connington have joined this cause because they think they serve the Targaryens or Rhaegar's memory. Despite what they believe this pretender to be, they will not enjoy fighting Rhaegar's son," Harry explained. "What do you propose?" Rob sighed, these inner squabbles clearly taking a toll on him. "That Jon rides into battle as a Targaryen. Let them see they are fighting the son of their lost hero. It will break their resolve before the battle has even started. It will make rooting them that much easier when the moment comes," the young Lord of Carhold told them. "It is a good idea," Rob mused. He turned towards him. "Jon, the armor, would you consider it?" He took a deep breath and nodded. "I will make sure it's ready by the morrow." "Good, now I must get back to the army. I have a battle plan to explain to all of you." His brother ended the discussions. Chapter 55, The Field of Gold. 300 AC. Oberyn Martell. He marched in front of his troops. He had received command of the middle from Aegon. Not too surprising, as it consisted of 10,000 Dornish spears. The other 5,000 Dornishmen were spread around the archer and cavalry units, with 1,500 infantrymen held back in reserve. He stalked along the line, looking his men directly in their eyes. They should see their commander and know he wasn't afraid of what was to come. He stopped and looked over his troops. They were fresh and well rested. They were well armed and morale was also high enough. The only problem was that most of them were green. Some units had gotten some fighting experience when they attacked Stormlander castles, but almost none had fought in actual battles yet. Today would make hard men out of them. The weak ones wouldn't survive, while the others would remember those that died at their feet. They would remember their fallen friends and the satisfying feeling when you pulled your weapon out of your enemy, leaving a big bleeding hole in its place. Most importantly, they were loyal. Those men were of Dawn. Men of Dawn were different from the rest, and not only in promiscuity. He knew that due to his character, his reputation and his name, these soldiers would follow him to the end of the world if he asked it of them. The enemy had lined up in front of them, but none made a move just yet. They stared at each other, outside of range of their archers. He looked at the enemy's army composition. From the banners, it seemed the Stark King had positioned his northern veterans in the center. That meant he and his men would be fighting the cream of the enemy army, under the command of that umber giant that had taunted him yesterday. He would gladly cross swords with him and make him shut up forever. Across their right were positioned the Vale troops, with next to them the Vale cavalry. On the enemy right were positioned Rivermen and Stormlanders with the northern cavalry on their flank. The boy king's personal standard was found behind the army on a hill surrounded by what he assumed was the reserve cavalry. All in all, it was as he had expected. Their plan remained the same. He and his men would pin the enemy center, while the Golden Company would slice through their flanks and encircle them. They might have done them a favor by putting their best troops in the center. They could hold the enemy's best there until they had disposed of the men of the Riverlands and the Vale. He turned around contently and started boosting his men's spirits once again, when suddenly a collective gasp could be heard. He turned around and what he saw shocked even him for a moment. In front of the enemy right, riding towards the center were two riders. One was a herald, carrying a banner with the split sigils of houses Targaryen and Stark next to each other. The other was Rhaegar Targaryen, or so it seemed. He recognized the armor the Crown Prince had worn during at the tourney of Lannisport. The tourney had been given in honor of the birth of Prince Viserys, in what seemed a lifetime ago. Rhaegar had defeated everyone except his friend Sir Arthur Dayne. It was a feat many still remembered to this day. The rider's black armor shone dangerously in the winter sun, a red cape flowing behind him. From a distance, he did look like Rhaegar, although he seemed to ride better than the former Crown Prince in his opinion. No one could be mistaken on who it was, though, as a white direwolf ran next to the rider. Once they were in front of the army, the black rider ordered his white steed and companion to halt. There they stood in silence, simply staring down the entire army, as if daring them to attack him. It was clear he made quite the impression on the army, but he wouldn't let Lyanna's bastard have this moral victory right before the battle. He screamed at his men to snap to attention, riling them up with war cries. They quickly answered with their own. Soon answering war cries came from the opposite army in the distance, yet the rider still remained silent. At last, he rode back to the northern cavalry on the flank. He grinded his teeth at the gall that boy had to do this. Yet, it seemed the impact had been limited. It hadn't worked. He thought smugly. Sadly, he would be proven wrong only seconds later. Suddenly cries came from his left, and when he looked, he saw how their entire left cavalry was retreating from the battlefield. The banners of houses fell and Cockshaw slowly disappearing in the distance. Commotion could also be heard in the archer line and on their left, where the infantry of those houses and their allies augmented the Golden Company's lines. A few cries were heard and soon the commotion ended. Not much later, a rider from the Golden Company arrived with news for him. Most of the Stormlanders and Reachman houses have betrayed us and fled the field. The entire left flank cavalry has retreated away in orderly fashion towards the forest to our left. Many of their archers have also ran away, although more in a rout than anything else, as Connington is running some of them down with the reserve cavalry. Their infantry tried the same but was forced back into the line by Captain General Strickland. Their captains have already been executed. He nodded silently. It seemed Strickland was as decisive and capable as he had hoped. He had feared it wouldn't be the case, as the man couldn't be considered the bravest of men. Connington also seemed to behave decisively, although far less competent. Routing and slaughtering the traitorous archers, although greatly satisfying, would do little for their cause. He should have forced them back into their ranks. He stabilized his line, and before he knew it horns and trumpets were blown from across the field. Seeing the enemy line slowly approach, them energized his whole army. He shouted some encouragements to his men, as he slowly made his way to his place in the formation. It might seem heroic to stand on the first line, experience had also told him that it was plain stupidity. One charge of one of these northern giants and he would be on his back, stuck between his countrymen and unable to move. No, he would hold position a few lines back. Close enough to jump in the thick of the fighting with his men, but able to nullify the infantry charge. Dornishman, spearwall! He screamed, and hundreds of spears lowered in an impressive show of discipline and skill. In front of them the enemy was picking up pace. Suddenly, the sound of over 1,000 bowstrings could be heard from behind them. The arrows flew in beautiful arcs above their heads and buried themselves in mud, shields and flesh. Screams were heard, but it only seemed to invigorate the enemy infantry. Before the next volley could land, the first of the bearded savages charged into their line. He pushed back, using his body weight to hold the man in front of him in place. He quickly scanned the line. In some places it was buckled, but nowhere did it break. He smiled. No one could hold a spear wall like the Dornish could. More and more wolves kept streaming in their line, but still they held. From time to time, he stepped forward as they replaced the soldiers who had fallen on the first line. He screamed his orders and motivated the men, and they held. He knew that along the line his lords were doing the same thing. They had some experienced nobles in their ranks. Lords Anders Urenwood and Franklin Fowler held the troops closest to the flanks. He had placed them as far away from each as possible, as their shared enmity was well known. Between them, Lords Gargallan, Jourdain, Manwadi and Corgal held similar commands with him in the middle. Surrounding him were some of the strongest fighters of Dorne. Sir Rian Illyrian, the heir to God's grace, stood to the left of him, and the Dalt brothers to his right. Behind him stood Sir Ulwick Euler, his paramour's uncle and a fearsome warrior. Other notable knights and nobles from all around Dorne joined him. Many forgot that he had made just as many friends as he had made enemies in his time. All of those now stood beside him. Most notably was the presence of his two eldest daughters Oberyn and Nymeria behind him. Oberyn was born for this, carrying spear and shield in battle. Nymeria's presence was more surprising, but she had been adamant. For the occasion, she had changed her dresses for armor he had had made for her. She carried a spear and shield like him and her sister, but he knew she had at least half a dozen daggers hidden on her body for close-quarter combat. Tyenn had stayed with Arianne in Storm's End. She was equally serving as her handmaiden, confidant and bodyguard. Roles which suited her well, he mused as the man in front of him was struck down by a brutish Northman wearing the colors of House Dustin. He stepped forward, bashing the man back with his shield and taking his position in the line. The man quickly got up again and came back for more. He gladly complied, sticking his spear through his thigh before swirling it around and piercing the man's neck as he had fallen to his knees. Blood gushed out, deterring his compatriots for a while. He gathered his breath and soon his respite was over. Northman after Northman came upon him. Some he simply pushed back, others he managed to wound, and a few he managed to kill them. One-on-one none of them would stand a chance, however he couldn't risk breaking the line to kill some northern sheep farmer dressed up in armor. The battle went on like this for a while, until he suddenly heard screams from behind him. He looked around but couldn't see as he needed to focus on an enemy with an axe and a shield in front of him. Recognizing that this could be a turning point in the battle, he stepped forward out of the line. He bashed his shield against the enemy's nose, making a horrible sound as it broke on impact. Not giving him a time to regain his composure, he swept the man's feet with the edge of his spear. As the man lay on the ground, he knocked his sword away, swirled his spear around and pierced its head through the Northman's exposed neck. He bashed two others back with his shield and swirled his spear in a wide arc to create space. "Ulwick!" he shouted at his paramour's uncle. "Take my place in the line, I need to go see what's going on." Not waiting on the reply, he strode back into the line. He had managed to push the enemy back enough so he could freely walk back to his troops. His soldiers making way for him to get to safety. Once inside the ranks, he looked around to see what was going on in the back and his eyes went wide. The Northern horse had charged in their rear. What was Connington doing? How could this have happened? He raced to the back of the lines to get control of the situation. As he looked around him, he could see Oberyn and some of his elite guard were following him. Nodding to his daughter, he moved on and quickly reached the back lines. The enemy cavalry had pulled back and were preparing to charge once more. In the distance he could see the Targaryen bastard leading the horsemen with his beast right beside him. He was too far away from him to do anything about it though. He scanned the line, as he shouted for men to form another spear wall. Sir Simon Santager and Lord Vaith were doing the same on different parts of the line. Good, at least some seemed to be somewhat capable of reacting to the enemy. As they waited for the charge, another set of screams could be heard from his right. Before he knew it, he could see how parts of the grouping of men routed from the battlefield. Most that ran were those Stormlanders and Reachmen that had been forced back into the ranks at the start of the battle, but some men in gold could also be seen among them. The rout instilled fear in the hearts of his men, he knew, but that they had no time to react. The bastard chose this time to charge at them. He locked shields with his daughter and one of his guards and prepared for the impact. Hundreds of riders rode at them, their horses' hooves thundering across the field. Right before impact, he jumped forward and pierced a black destrier's belly with his spear. The horse kicked up before falling down and throwing off his rider. The rider was immediately trampled by one of his colleagues. However, the clash had the result he had wanted, a very small part of the charge was stopped. Both he and Obara were spared from the impact. Not everyone was this lucky, as he could see how parts of the spear wall had simply disappeared after the charge. In those parts a fierce melee erupted, after his defensive line was swept away. Enemies swarmed them from all sides. He punched one in the throat with his shield, floored another and stabbed one through the thigh. Not much later, he cut the saddle of a rider, throwing him from his horse